Hello and welcome to Defense Diaries. I'm your host, Bob Mata, and this is our continuing coverage of the people of the state of Indiana versus Richard M. Allen, day 20. So today was the day that the defense rested, state got the rebuttal in, and now all that's left is closing arguments. Oh, hi, babe. There's my beautiful, brilliant co-host, Allie. I love it.
Hey, babe.
All right, so here's the deal. I had wanted Allie to start this 5 minutes earlier so I could wolf down this food, but she was late. So I'm going to dip out. I'm going to let you talk for a few minutes so I could eat this food, and then I'll be right back.
Hi, guys. I mean, I was about to click start before he did, so I don't know why he had to jump the gun, but at least we won't get hangry, Bob. And I can tell you, it is something that does run in the family, not my family. All right. So, as I'm sure everybody or most of you know, both sides have rest. Closing arguments start tomorrow. Sounds like you're going to have a lawyer rich verdict watch. Sounds like Lawyer Lee, Andrea Burkhart, and Bob are all going to be giving you verdict watch. So that should be fun. And yes, so I'm assuming that's Steve there with Publicly Buzzed. I saw Bob wearing his Publicly Buzzed T-shirt yesterday. It seemed like he kept trying to make himself a little taller, so more of the logo showed. But you got most of it. I'm sort of on edge just as much as you guys trying to figure out what exactly happened today. Like what was there like something big? What did the prosecution do? I got very little. It's shoddy service on the way home from the courthouse from Bob, and so we'll get what we'll have to get it all from Bob. But I do want to thank Meg P before we start for congratulating us on 30K. That's amazing. That's great. Thanks, guys. I do want to know. So one thing I do know that happened today is that the defense rested as soon as they got in the courtroom. So they did not have any additional evidence to present today. So surprisingly, although what we had heard and expected and was, I think, on their witness list was that Kathy Allen was going to testify. So I guess we'll have to wait till after trial is over, and hopefully we'll be able to get some discussions from the defense team about that decision. But actually, now that I'm thinking about it, probably not. The lawyer's not going to discuss their strategy. I mean, unless he gets found not guilty, then sure. Otherwise, there's appeals, there's a whole other process. But still, what do you guys think? Do you guys think that the jury was expecting to hear more, needed to hear more? What are your preliminary thoughts at this point? I want to hear from you. And I also want to thank Cool Lady. Oh, now I want to thank Cool Lady who gifted 5 Defense Diary podcast memberships. Hopefully, there are 5 people out there super excited uh, to receive that. And if you're just out there listening and you're not chatting, don't forget to subscribe so that you can get notice when things are going to be kind of happening quick here now. Once they get into verdict watch, there will be questions, there'll be stuff will be coming up. And we'll have to see, maybe if they're all going to run into the courtroom, maybe we keep the live going um, with me, or they may have to stop and restart. So just subscribe so you're getting those notifications. Um, and then, members, and if you're out there, our podcast um, Patreons should get uh, priority with regards to questions that are not super stickers. There's some notes on the Patreon page about I think that um, that should tell you how to make yourself known. And I'm pretty sure that our moderators know what identifies you people out there as members, so that some of your questions are randomly being chosen to get comments on. So I will warn you now that I am going to have to get off this live somewhat early today because I've got to take my wonderful daughter shopping for a bat mitzvah dress. We're heading to Philadelphia without Bob, and we need some accessories. So I'll have to skate out a little bit early, but let's see what you guys have been thinking as far as if the jury needed to hear more. See if we've got any. So Tina said, "Oh, sorry. I just Mandy, if you want to put back that other comment because I didn't see it before I clicked on Tina's, but she thinks the jury's needed more an alibi for Rick." Well, as far as the jury knows, they don't know if Kathy, when Kathy could put him at home, but the I definitely think that that's a valid point, that it would have been nice for them to hear what time he got home. Let's see. We've got Shannon M. She wishes the defense introduced more, but I don't know if Gull had them a lot of work to work with, gave them a lot to work with. That's true. She didn't let them put a lot of stuff in. When Bob gets back, I'm going to ask him to start all over and reintroduce so that Darren, our podcast producer, knows when to start this live and doesn't give me a bunch of shit about communicating with the chat in the middle of the live. But as you guys know, we are converting these into podcasts, trying to get them out to the world as quickly as possible on all forums, since the judge has kept everything so out of the public's realm and inaccessible to the people. So we're trying to do that. So it's not only out in the YouTube world, but out in the podcast world as well, and that they're getting, more than um, a different perspective out there, because we need to make sure people aren't hearing just one-sided information. So Kathy did not testify today. The defense did rest as soon as it got back into the courtroom. I think we've got Jay here. Where's Jay? I hear publicly, but there he is. Jay says, oh, he's talking to Tracy. Hi, Jay. So Crime Time Crochet, she wanted Rick's phone location and or log information, stocks. I did too. I don't understand why that stuff wasn't accessible. I don't know if he had, like, if this Ting, because look, on my phone, it doesn't matter what service I have. I have an iPhone. I have an iCloud account. When I change phones, unless I'm switching over to an Android, uh, all my information's getting downloaded from my iCloud. And he said he saved that he always wanted his contacts to carry over. So I don't know what the issue is. The issue might have been that he wasn't syncing everything with his phone. It might be that he switched, like, literal type of devices. I mean, clearly, if he had, like, a flip phone, I don't remember when we got rid of flip phones, but I don't think we had flip phones in 2017. That seems absurd. But, who knows if he had the type of account or device that you would have sort of downloaded that level of information. Although I have had clients who years and years old phones had information from an earlier iCloud, or I've had the police subpoena the actual iCloud data and then do onto it their own device, drop it on there. So, Bob, just because Darren would love it, and there's so many more people here, start over like we just started. We can't hear you though. So,
Welcome to Defense Diaries. I'm your host, Bob Mata, and this is our continuing coverage of the people of the state of Indiana versus Richard M. Allen. And I am joined by my beautiful and brilliant co-host, Allie. What's up, girl?
hey, babe. Hey, all.
So, big day, surprising day. We went in, and you guys know, if you follow my Twitter account at defense_diaries, which you should, pretty decent sized account. I try to give you guys some thought-provoking, interesting insights into the crazy true crime world, not just Delphi, but all kinds of stuff I get into. Obviously, I am very Delphi-centric these days, but this morning, coming in, I had fully anticipated that we probably might get one, maybe two witnesses, as Allie had noted a little bit earlier, pre our updated welcome. She had noted that Kathy Allen was on the list, and we'll get into that discussion in depth here in a few minutes. But I thought that they would probably most likely call or recall Stacey Eldridge, their forensic phone data expert that they had on yesterday. If you recall, and I'm sure whether you're watching our lives or any of our friends' lives, that that she had the stunning information that the headphone port of Libby's phone had been accessed at 5:44 p.m. and remained accessed up until 10:23 p.m., in which it was disengaged. That had not been known by anybody. That had not been out in the public sphere. I had never read about it anywhere, not from Reddit, not anywhere. That was brand new information.
But
And
Bob, if I understand correctly, it was not brand new to the state because the Cecil, if that's the way you say his name, is that correct?
yes,
Cecil's report specifically indicated something about that. There was an asterisk, and he says, that there was no research on what that meant. So they knew it was out there, and Cecil knew it was out there. And you would assume, because I remember from your coverage of the cross of Cecil, that the defense asked him something, and maybe I'm wrong about what that something was, but I thought it was like, do you know what output data is? They definitely asked him, do you know what X, Y, and Z is? I can't remember what that was. So my thought was maybe that was related to this topic to establish that he did not already know it. But the state shouldn't have been surprised, although, right, none of us in the public and yourself and knew that was out there, that was something.
yeah, I think the more accurate way to say it is that information was contained in the extractions that they had done. Law enforcement, remember, Eldridge did not do her own extraction of the phone, meaning that she was sent Bunner's extraction that he did on the 15th, and then they were sent the full file system extraction that he finally was able to do in October of 2022. And so that's what she had. And when I'm saying that those were sent to them, that means that she can access all of the data. It's not a paper report. She's actually sent the full extraction. She can plug in the flash. It opens up. She can access all the data. She can move about through all the different areas contained within the Cellubrite extraction, all the different tabs. She can go everywhere, and she does the under the hood stuff, which she really needed the full file system extraction that finally took place again in October. So the point being is that they knew, but they had no idea what it was. It was there for them. But Chris Cecil doesn't have the education in terms of forensic data from phones to know what it was. And he didn't have the wherewithal to try to figure it out in the 7 years that this thing was, festering. Now, in fairness to Cecil, he didn't come on board in terms of his role until 2019. I think that would have been Bunner that would have been responsible, or the feds. I got into a long diatribe. I know you weren't with me last night. I don't know if you listened to the live last night, but they were uninvited to the party in August of 2021, wherein the result of that, you no longer have the resources, the manpower, or the people power, or the human power, whatever is the appropriate thing to say these days. And they obviously don't have the technology that the feds have. So it's inexplicable to me why the feds would have been uninvited to the party. It leads your mind to nefarious places. I think that the only viable excuse that law enforcement could come up with is like, oh, we didn't want the feds to solve this thing and get the credit for it. We wanted it to be our credit,
I
which
think there's some truth
frankly,
to that. Do you?
yeah, 100%. Like,
I mean, I
law
think they
enforcement,
wanted all the glory or whatever. It's kind
yeah.
of a sad, pathetic side of investigations and law enforcement. But so I take it from what you're expressing that you were equally surprised the defense rested this morning without it offering anything additional?
Yeah, but let me get there. Let me finish the thought here. So, like, and I just wanted to correct you in terms of the Cecil thing. They did not tip that hand the first time that Cecil was on the stand. They knew they had it. They would never have tipped that hand, giving them an idea that they knew that this thing was out there. If they would have asked Cecil when he was on direct in the state's case in chief, that would have tipped them. They were not tipping them. They knew the state didn't know about it because they had never brought it up. So when they brought it
Okay.
up is when they called Cecil after they had Stacey Eldridge on. They then called Cecil because, like I was saying, they wanted to lock him in that night before they got to have a full night overnight. They wanted him on the stand within 15 minutes, which he was. And then we get the controversial Google search in that 10 minutes while we have the break. And then she asks him, what is the audio output route or router?
Oh,
And he said, I have no idea. I've never heard of it. So they
okay.
got him
So
locked into that. And then of course, he says, well, I Googled during the break and I saw that port can either be fooled into thinking it has something plugged into it by either water damage or dirt or some other kind of material gets in that port, and the phone will be fooled into thinking the headphones are in there.
and I actually wanna say something on that, but so I just want to then clarify that you're correcting me on my whole I know they asked him something where like, "Do you know?" But what you're saying, it definitely wouldn't have been, "Do you know what the audio X is?" Because they weren't showing their hand.
Correct.
Alright, so on this concept, I feel like the state can't have it both ways. They can't have it that the phone was off or inaccessible, but still because if the phone's off, it's not logging as water or anything else, whether that something is plugged into the aux port. So that doesn't work with what they're saying either. And also, did they address the difference between your phone possibly uh, thinking that a device is plugged in or whatever it is they're saying with how the Cellubrite is going to interpret that? Why it would show up and where it would show up, because I don't know why the judge let that in because I think it's sort of irrelevant what might happen with the device itself if you don't know how that translates into how is that interpreted data-wise by an extraction.
Are you asking, did the defense address it?
Well, I was asking if the state is, but yeah, sure, I'm asking if the defense did as well.
Well, if you're jumping ahead into what the state did in rebuttal, no, they did not address it at all. It wasn't brought up at all, and the defense couldn't address it. That's why getting to today, I was very surprised. I thought that they would have had Stacey Eldridge, their forensic data expert, former Fed of 10 years. I thought that she would get on the stand, having done research last night, and say, I'm calling bullshit on Cecil's Google search. So what happens is that Brad Rozzi comes out, Andy Baldwin comes out, Jen comes out, and states there. They bring the jury in, and the judge says, Mr. Rozzi, call your first witness. Your Honor, the defense rests. So I was like, oh, wow. So, and I want to make a couple observations. I'm watching the jury very closely when those words are uttered out of Brad's mouth. And I can tell you definitively, and this is unequivocal. I don't care what anybody else says. I saw it with my own eyes. And juror number 4, who's a female, that's all I'll say about descriptives. Her eyebrows raised. Like, she's like, whoa. She looks over to juror number 5, another female, and she's like, wow. I saw her mouth the word wow. I wrote it in my notes. All the jurors started kind of looking at each other. The juror number 5, who looked at juror number 4, whose eyebrows raised, wrote down a note. And there were kind of a lot of looks back and forth between a lot of the jurors that I got the distinct impression that they were very surprised that the defense had rested right there. And now, so just to kind of to play out what has been happening in this courtroom throughout the course of this trial, and just and I don't know if there's people that watch or listen to other creators that are in that room, and more power to you if you do. I just want to be very clear that I was not a guest of the defense ever at this trial. I was a guest of Kathy Allen and the Allen family in this trial from day one up until the very end of this thing. I've always been with Kathy and the family. I want to be support for them. Kathy is living a nightmare, as you can imagine. Her life was uprooted and destroyed in the blink of an eye. It went from one day just living, doing what they do. She goes to work. Rick goes to work, like dealing with normal people shit every day, to your life gets burnt down, torn down to the studs within minutes. It's like everything in your life has changed. And if you can try to appreciate that from that perspective, if you could try to put yourselves in the shoes of somebody who experienced something like that, I think that if you are a person that has empathy just in general, that you will quickly understand just maybe, a smidge of what Kathy Allen's been going through for 2 years. So I have been more than willing to be a shoulder for her to cry on, to give as many hugs as she needs, and to be a sounding board to try to give her information that she doesn't understand in terms of what's going on with the legal process. I do all of those things. And it's been an honor and a privilege to be able to do that for her and for Jan and for the whole family, Jamie, everybody who's been there. I said it last night and I'm going to repeat it. They are salt of the earth. They are just kind, genuine people, Midwestern folk that are just the nicest people you ever meet. It's just, it's factual. There's no disputing it. I will die on that hill, and I will, like, don't mess with the Allen family if I'm around. I'm just going to tell people that. And I'm talking about when a verdict comes down, if it doesn't come down with Richard Allen being acquitted, if anybody, I mean, they're going to have to deal with me. So,
And before you get into it, I do just want to note that it's the defense attorneys would definitely have let Richard Allen know, we've decided not to call any witnesses they had outstanding. We're gonna rest. How much they would have allowed him to have any voice in that, who knows? It is one of the sole decisions of the attorney. Strategy is always the sole decision of the attorney, so what witnesses to call and what witnesses not to call and when to call them. But I think it would be expected and commonplace that the lawyers would, let their client know ahead of time that they decided, not to call someone as big as their spouse and that they were resting. But again, there's no telling, how involved Alan is or isn't in those actual discussions, and how much they consider his voice. But I would, just as pure speculation, suspect, based on what you've sort of reported, Bob, about how it seems their relationship is, and the way they've sort of the way they've stood up throughout these proceedings for him, from long before trial until now, that they did explain it in detail, maybe hear him out, use him as a sounding board, but definitely give them their thought process on why they've decided not to do it.
yeah, and I don't know if that was necessarily a conversation that took place. I mean, they're limited in terms of their access to their client. Obviously, he's spending the night in Cass County Jail, and you and I both know that when you are in the throes of a defense like this, in the middle of a trial, your mind is going a million miles an hour. You are trying to think of everything humanly possible that we need to do in a very short amount of time, trying to make sure that we have checked and double checked and triple checked. Is there evidence that we need to get in, that we can get in? I mean, it's like you're so enveloped in what's going on when you're trying a case like this, from the defense attorney's perspective, or the state for that matter. The outside world is nothing but white noise. That being said, I would not at all be surprised that Rick Allen would have told the defense attorneys, who is incredibly protective of his wife, and we heard it in the interviews. It's reminiscent of how protective I am of you. If anybody comes after you, I get ferocious.
Yes, you do.
I'm a pretty soft guy, unless you mess with my people, and in particular my wife. You're gonna have a problem with me, and I've said it plenty of times on these lives. Don't come at my woman, or you're going to have a real issue. So, and I get the sense that Rick is very much like that with respect to Kathy, who is his everything. I mean, that was abundantly clear. Like, nobody on that jury is going to have a thought, or a doubt in their mind that Rick loves his wife, and that love goes both ways. I mean, that was displayed every day in the courtroom. But so, like, to get back to what I was saying, so originally the way that the decorum order read, in terms of the seating, was that it was supposed to be the defense got 10 seats, but it was really supposed to be Kathy Allen got 10 seats. And then for her family and her people and her support. And then the families, I think, were supposed to get 10 each. So for, the Patties, we're going to get 10. Um, and then Abby's family was
But
going to
didn't
get.
the prosecution and the defense get 10 in the well?
That's a little less clear. Like, to me, it read that they were getting 3 aside from essential people. So in terms of essential people that they had on their team, Brad's paralegal, Sarah's in there every day. Matt Hoffman, one of their investigators, and then young Max Baker. He has been in there every day. Max has been the one who, I mean, how we always need somebody. Hey, this is what I need, and they're digging things up and they're pulling depths for you. Whatever you need. I need this piece of evidence. I need this report. You got to have those hands behind you when you're in a trial like this in order to function efficiently. So, but we were sitting in the second row. So you had the Patties were always in the second row, and they gave Gulf, for whatever reason, gave the media the front row, which I thought was absurd. And then yesterday when I came in and I had called you because I had told you, uh, I think last Friday, not this last Friday, but the Friday prior, Nick McClellan had said, I need three of the media seats on the family side, Abby and Libby's side, for prosecution for my people. Like if he had people that he wanted to come in, not necessarily witnesses. And I would expect with the separation order that it definitely wasn't witnesses. I don't know if it was Nick's wife, his friend, whatever, whoever it was. He said, I need him. So they then took three seats from Kathy's row. So she was down to six seats. And then going into, and this is 2 days ago, and so Kathy had texted me and I'm like, and I would never take a family seat, it's like I'm not doing that because she's like, I've got six people coming. I'm like, oh, I might be out of luck. And Allie's like, you don't stand in line. I'm like, no, hell no, I'm not going to
Well,
stand.
it's too late because people had started in the afternoon.
Right.
So it was
Like the way
non-option.
it's been right. Like anybody who's been listening to Lee and Andrea, they know the dilemma and the nightmare that the line thing is. It's insane. Like they've moved the chairs. They originally had them on the ADA compliant wheelchair ramp that they have that leads up to the door where they let everybody in, and people were lining their portable chairs up there when we're walking out of court. They're already lined up for the next day of like, we're going to start our line, and it's competitive. It's a very competitive thing. It's got like people are cheating, they're moving things, they're shifting chairs when people are in court. And it got to the point where the sheriffs and the deputies are like, we're done with this shit. If you're gonna He's like, you're gonna be in deep trouble if we catch you screaming and arguing out around the courthouse. So they moved them all down to the sidewalk. They got them off of the courthouse property. So they're technically on public property in terms of being on the sidewalk, but back into the courtroom. So on the morning of, when I had told you, Kathy had texted me that night. She's like, Jen, one of the lawyers, she's like, I had talked to Jen. She thinks that you're going to be okay. She thinks that she can get two additional seats. She's going to
for
talk to
for the
like
family.
the family and Kathy's support. So I go into the morning thinking like I'm still nervous. You don't know, because it's like we didn't have passes at that point. So like, that say the Allen family on it. So it's like I go and I walk in, and I'm always walking in at 8:45. Like that's just when I walk in. I'm like clockwork every day. My alarm goes off. I take my shower. I'm out the door at the exact minute every single day. I do the drive. It takes exactly how long. I park in the same place. So it's rote. It's like it's robotic almost. So then I get into the courtroom and the whole row is taken. And then I go and I tell Kathy, I said, I guess I'm out. And she's like, I don't know what to do. And so I'm like, don't worry about it. So then I go up to the behind the bar of the court, which is that half wall that separates the well of the courtroom from the gallery. And I'm like, hey, Jen, is there anything you could do about moving these three media people out of this row, Kathy's row? And she points over, she says, tell that woman to move. And I'm like, that woman right there. She's like, yeah, that's my sister. So Ajay's sister was that. She's like, I'll have her come sit up here. So Jen's sister got to go sit in the well of the courtroom. It opened up a seat for me. In the meantime, one of Kathy's support had gone down and talked to Tobe Lazenby, the former sheriff, who was down there. And, she's like, look, the decorum order said that Kathy Allen gets 10 seats. She's been screwed this entire trial. So like Tobe, to his credit, said, I'm going to handle this. So by the end of the day, they had given Kathy Allen 10, like little placards, like the little name, like not name tags, but like lanyards that you clip it on, and it says the Allen family. And so every person that she wants in her row gets one of these cards. And when I came in this morning, they had moved Kathy and the family up to the front row. So it was vastly different. I think that there was a realization that, that the families need to be in front because this is their lives that are on trial.
So I'm
And
assuming they moved, Libby and Abby's family to the front as well?
yeah, but I think that the Patties were fine with where they were, and I have to say that Becky Patty, out of to show the character of that woman, she was fighting to get Kathy's people seats that same day. She stood up and she was like, she was telling people, "Can you please move over here? We have room over here so that Kathy Allen's family can sit there." So the Patties are wonderful people as well. I mean, everybody that is involved with this horrible case has been nothing but kind to one another. It's never been anything other than civilized in that courtroom.
That
Um,
does show a lot of character to be able to separate his family from him, assuming they think he's I'm assuming that they think that he did this horrible thing, so it shows
it
I don't
does.
even know if I'd be able to d like, it's hard to put your you can't put yourself in that position, but I don't know that I would be able
Yeah,
to
I
do
think
that.
if we can harken back to like the Garcia case, I think to a person that the families of the Brumbacks and both the Hunters all said that they felt awful for Anthony Garcia's parents. I mean, these were just two sweet people, registered nurse that had worked their entire lives and a retired, postman, that had no idea, that were so proud that their son, this Mexican American immigrant, coming from an immigrant family, had made his way through law or med school. And, all of a sudden, like out of nowhere, their kid is charged with being a monster. And, this family never saw it coming ever. Like, it's like whatever Anthony may have had going on with him, throughout the course of their lives, they never put it together that this is what it would end up being. So, I mean, they were just devastated. That whole family was just like, I mean, it's unfathomable. Like as a parent, your worst fear is that your kid's going to, turn out to be a horrible person. It's like you feel a certain amount of responsibility as a parent. You're like, oh my God, was that our failure as parents that my kid turned out like that? Was it genetic? Is it, which is it? Is it nature or is it nurture or is it both? Like, who knows? So and like I've just been trying to tell people for long before this was a trial that everybody involved in these cases from both sides, the defendant's family, they're victims in a massively different way, but victims nonetheless. It's like lives are just the fabric of everything that you've built through decades is just shredded in a matter of moments, and it's like you have to have empathy and sympathy for everybody involved, and I certainly do. But enough of that. So that was kind of where we're at today. It was an interesting dynamic, and I'm glad that Kathy and Jan and Ken and Jamie were up front to be able to sit there, and I think that it was nice for Alan to be able to connect with his wife, because I'm going to restate it. The Patties and the Williams family, they have no one in the Allens have no idea what's going on in this trial. They are not kept in the loop, so to speak, in terms of what evidence is. They're not calling law enforcement, and Nick McClellan aren't calling him and saying, "Look, this is our strategy. This is what we're doing. This is what the evidence is." And same with the defense, with the Allen family. Like they have no idea what's going on. I mean, it was to the extent where Kathy didn't know if she was going to be getting called, and I'm like trying to find out for her. I'm like, just so she can have a heads up. And I start to get into this thing where I'm thinking about if it's like you and I, and like to call Kathy to the stand, like that was the first thing that came in my mind as soon as the defense said that they rested. you know um I wrote, my note was, I'm worried that they should have called Kathy, because I think that the jury, I think the missing ingredient potentially for Richard Allen is the fact that we have nothing out there at all in terms of evidence, whether it's cell phone data, and like you were stating, I don't know if Ping or Ting, which I've never heard of, which they've been using for years. It reminds me of like Cricket or Boost Mobile. It's like one of these like little companies that you can get a phone through that are exceptionally cheaper than AT&T, Verizon, all the big carriers, and it's like I don't know if they have the records accessible like you can get, like that they were able to use for Libby in terms of getting her precise or the historic precise location data. That data is what places the phone in certain places, and it's kept for in perpetuity.
In
You know, you
perpetuity?
yeah, you can get that from the carrier whenever. You don't need the phone. They're
I
gonna
know,
be
but I didn't think the carriers stored that for in
yeah,
perpetuity.
yeah, because they got that late for Libby. I mean, in 5 years.
Hmm,
So, like, I mean, maybe perpetuity's
a
an
stretch. Yeah.
overstatement. Maybe it's not gonna be forever, but I mean, they certainly were able to get the information much later than I would have expected. It's certainly better than what you're going to be able to get in terms of cell phone records proper. Text messages. We know that we can see when texts were sent beyond 30 days. You're not going to get the content of what the messages say. Um, so after that, the defense rests. State was not ready. So obviously there was not any kind of substantive like discussion that was going on. Or the last time the defense had called and talked to McClellan, if it was Brad and Nick talking, they're like, we're still trying to figure shit out. We're still powwowing. We don't know if we're gonna do this or that. We don't know which way it's gonna go. Where'd she go? Where'd you go? She jumped off. I don't know where she went. Like, I was liking the discussion. I think she can push off Scarlett for a bit to go get the food. But so all right, good. Yeah, because it's like you gotta tell me. It's like my room's a mess. I got bed, like don't put me on full blast like
I
that.
that
Like
was one of those where I
my
accidentally do
empty like
something.
taco, my
That
empty
was like I accidentally
burrito
touched
bowl.
something and it kicked me out. It wasn't.
Oh yeah, I've done that many times. Um, so it's apparent that whatever took place in terms of conversations between the state and the defense, which they said that they were going to do, like going into today, that they were going to communicate, but the defense is going late into the night. You're prepping for this until 1, 2 in the morning until you have to get some kind of sleep if you can, so that you're somewhat well rested or a version of well rested. And obviously, the debates on who they were going to call and who they weren't going to call. Should we rest? Should we just, should we call it a day? Should we put Eldridge on the stand? Should we put Kathy on the stand? What are the pratfalls? What are the minefields out there in terms of, like, if we put Kathy on the stand, what do we need to worry about? We're concerned about just kind of the bloodlust in this case. To go back to what Diener was saying, there's a lot of truth in it. It's like, do you put Kathy on there and she says one thing that somebody in the audience misconstrues, and now this thing haunts her forever, and people are doxing her. They already doxed her. They put her address on some Facebook group or Reddit group or some bullshit. It's like, those are all things that you're taking in consideration. And then when we harken back to the discussion about, like, I have an inkling that Rick would have said, I don't want Kathy up there. Like, I don't want to expose her to this. She didn't have anything to do with it. But, that being said, like I said, that just in my brain, and it's easy to armchair quarterback it, sitting on this side of the bar, not being the ones trying the case. You're like, man, but just and my gut was, as soon as I saw the jurors react like that, with like, it would look to me to be a little bit of surprise that they were done. The first thing that came to mind is that they wanted to hear from Kathy, because they all understand the defendant doesn't have to testify. They get that in the preliminary instructions that
You
were
never
read.
know, though. That could have been what their eyes went up, that they wanted to hear from Richard Allen.
Well, I think they wanted to hear from somebody that could put Allen somewhere at some point. Like, so that's what I was getting into. I think that the whole for the defense is going to be that they never heard where Rick was that day. Beyond whether you believe the 12 to 130 or the 130 to 3, whatever the case may be, you never hear where he's at after that. Like,
I
you never
think that's
hear,
problematic.
it's
Yeah.
problematic. It's like, it's the thing that scares me about about the defense's case is that it leaves the jury wondering where the hell was he, and they're going to be thinking, well, at the very least, Kathy's going to be able to say he was home. He was asleep on the couch when I got home. That there was no wash in the dryer or the washer when I got home.
Yeah, if there
Never
were no
left
bloody
the house that
clothes.
night.
He never does the wash, I always do the wash.
Right. And
The
like
wash dryer wasn't going, yeah, all those kinda little things.
all those little things, and it's just so I mean, we'll see how it plays out. But like that's what's going through my lawyer brain when I'm sitting there and this stuff all hits. So you're gonna be shocked and mortified for the next thing that I tell you. And so then they have, I guess, the first thing that Gull says is that it appears that Mr. McClellan doesn't have his rebuttal witnesses ready because he anticipated the defense was going to be putting something on, and he told them to come a little later.
Wait, she
So
said that in front of the jury?
she didn't go into that kind of detail. She said that some of the witnesses aren't ready. She told the jury. She said, "So we're gonna send you back for a little bit. We apologize." It was like he thought the defense might go a little longer. I don't know if he said that, but whatever the case was, it was clear that the state didn't have the witnesses ready at that moment in time, and there was going to be a little bit of a break to allow the witnesses to get there. And she may have just said that the witnesses aren't quite here yet. So they send them back. And then at that point, she's like, okay, well, counsel, let's have our jury instruction conference. And this is the part that's going to mortify you. She's like, well, so I've received no proposed instructions from either side. So I've submitted you the pattern instructions. Here's the packet. I'm giving one to each of you. You guys go take the time to read them. And then we'll reconvene a little bit before we're going to put them on to see if you guys have any beef with anything that I've given you. So, I mean, that's just unusual. Like when we try cases, like that's something that is always a bone of contention with respect to what instructions are going to be given and instructions that might be in there that we think don't need to be in there, or instructions that we think that aren't there that need to be there.
Well, I'm certain they're going to, at some point, do that, where they're gonna propose
No,
different
it's
ones.
over. Nope.
What?
Nope. So
No.
oh, do you want me to tell you?
Yes.
Okay, so they take the packet, they each take the package. Brad and Andy and Jennifer all leave, and presumably they're down in the basement looking at them. They come back like before, and it was probably turned out to be like about an hour and a half gap between then and when we come back. So they get back up there, and at that point, Baldwin said something to the effect, I'm not exactly thrilled with the instruction regarding Rick Allen not testifying. He's like, typically there's some language at the end that says that, you can't give it any weight in terms of the fact that he did not testify, and then Gull was like, oh, well, this is like a more recent, it's an updated pattern instruction that includes like a lot of language that most defense attorneys want in that instruction. So like when she says that, Baldwin looks at it and he's like, all right, he's like, I'll just stick with what you got there. And then so Brad wants an instruction that's going to come in, and we'll get to it a little later because he talks about. I actually wanted you to kind of look up the case because there's but I couldn't get this. It's the Stranger case, and with that, it deals with it's kind of like a false confession thing, going to, that they're allowed to consider the credibility of those confessions based on the evidence that they heard with respect to conditions of Allen's confinement, and that they can take that into consideration when judging the credibility of whether or not those were confessions that they should trust, and then but that argument comes a little later, and he says that I'll get it to you like before we come back from whatever lunch break we're going to take. So that was it for the jury instruction conference. So that's like, So Stranger, yeah, it sounded like I spelled it like stranger, so I don't.
I'll look it up, but it was definitely a false confession case, because, and I'm gonna try to reach out to Kara, but I tried to pull up the Indiana criminal, pattern jury instructions, and I remember having a hard time locating them, but I could be there's so many different cases that we talk about or cover that I could be wrong, but I'm gonna, you know, I'll look that up, and we'll on the when we do the closing live, maybe we'll touch base on that, or I guess whenever they instruct the jury as well, but and
Yeah.
I'll look for this case too.
Yeah. Okay, so let's get into it. So at this point, I take it back. So I have a few more notes on the jury instruction conference. She said that there were no objections to the instructions by the state. The defense had a few questions, again, regarding Rick not testifying. The defense says, and then Brad made that like kind of that original or just initial argument to the juror's ability to judge the credibility of the defendant's confessions. The court is the gatekeeper of whether or not the statements by the defendant were voluntary or involuntary, and that's coming from that Stranger case. So, and he said it's really a case specific instruction. And she said, "I'm like, this is the way we're going to do it." She said, like, "Oh, I like to give the general instructions before you do your closing." She says, "I think it's helpful for the jurors to understand the framework of the law." She said, "I think it's helpful for you guys, and it will save time for either of you having to go through and throw the instruction up in terms of, what has to be proven, going through what the statutes are and things of that nature." So, in terms of length of argument, it sounds like she's going to give each side, and she's talking about the preliminary for the state. And just so you guys know, I'm sure most of you that watch trials or observe trials or follow trials understand that the state always gets the last word. So there's a preliminary opening or a closing statement that will be made by the state first, then followed by the defense. That's their only bite at the apple. And then after the defense is done, the state gets the final bite at the apple. It's their burden. That's kind of the thought process. That's why they get the last word there. And so she's talking about giving each side, she said, between 2 and 2.5 hours for closings. Now, I don't know if that includes, like, typically the kind of the rebuttal closing for the state is typically much shorter than the initial closing. So she's like, "Look, if it goes a little long, if you guys like, I understand you're not looking at clocks. I was a trial attorney. I understand that you're in your head and you're not necessarily looking at time, and time flies. Time moves differently when you're in that situation," which is absolutely true. But she says, like, if you're going too far afield or too far past it, I might click my pen or give you some kind of like low key signal, like, "Oh, wrap it up," without interrupting you. Um,
So wait, before you go further, 2 things. 1, I had been promising the people that I was keeping an eye out for the motion in limine that the defense, that the state filed dealing with their false confession, person.
mhm.
So we did get that, and maybe I'll cover that tomorrow while you're in court. Secondly, so they did this kinda fast jury instruction conference, and it's done. Neither side proposed anything different or asked for a change other than that slight concern that ultimately ended up being like, "I'm accepting it anyway."
Well, that was for the Rick Allen not testifying on his own behalf, and then there was the remaining issue, which I'll get to a little later, with Rosie that he brought up about the confessions that he wants an instruction that's directly from the Stranger case that talks about it's the jurors, it's within their providence to determine whether or not they find those things to be credible in light of all that they've learned about the conditions under which they were made, which obviously we know there was psychosis going on, things that we'll never be able to know because the guards are never going to go up there and say we were making promises to get him the hell out of here, or that we were going to let him see Kathy, or that we were threatening, and whatever the case may be. Like those things were never going to come out, so that's where you're going to be in closing. You're going to be trying to, you're making argument. You're going to say, look, when he's in that state, and you make a promise, like when he's that far gone, and then they put him on the Haldol and he starts to normalize a little bit, and to where you can have a breakthrough, you gotten what you needed in terms of the confessions coming out. At this point, you're going to start going to him as the guards, especially after he starts confessing and saying, look, this is the carrot. Do you want to see Kathy? Then just confess, man. It's like, this is a simple thing here. You're making it way harder on yourself. Just confess to it. Or, do you want to be able to even call her? Just like, that's something that, would be tempting to him. Or do you want to get the hell out of this hellhole? That's something you want to transfer out. Boom, go, so you got to tell us what we need to hear then, so it's like those kind of arguments are going to be made. So let's get into the state's rebuttal. They called 3 witnesses total. The first one was Breanne Wilbur. You should remember her. She was called initially during the state's case in chief, and she was one of the girls that was with Rayleigh Voorhees and her 2 sisters that was out on the bridge that day. And Diener conducted the direct, and Diener said, okay, Miss Wilbur, thank you for coming back. As you previously testified, we're not going to go through all your details. So she jumps right into it. She says, look, you had provided testimony that you had been out there taking pictures. You were out at the bridge that day on the 13th of February, and that you were taking photos for your Snapchat account. She said, yes, that's true. And she said that previously you provided photos of Snapchats of you on a bench where we could see this house with the green roof on it. And that was timestamped. She says, that's correct. And she said, you also provided another set of Snapchat photos, didn't you? And that was when you were at the Freedom Bridge, when you were arriving. She says, yes. Baldwin objects. He says, can I ask a couple of preliminary questions? He says, so he asks Breanne Wilbur, he says, when did you provide these pictures to the state? And she's like, I'm not sure. He's like, well, was it before your testimony or after your testimony? She's like, no, it was before the trial started. She says maybe it was the first time that I talked to Stacy being Stacy Diener, the prosecutor. So these pictures were not out there. Like, they were not tendered to the defense in discovery. They were brought late in the game. I got the distinct impression that they had not been out there for an extended period of time. And so Gull lets her continue. And he's like, fine, whatever. And so she says, okay, well, what are we looking at? So she hands her both pictures. She says, okay, well, this is a picture of me at, right around the Freedom Bridge. And she says, okay, and what date was that? She says it was on the 13th of February in 2017. And she says, and is that particular picture posted to Snapchat? She says, yes. And she says, okay, well, when is it timestamped? She says, yes, it is. So what time does it show? And then is that right around the time that you arrived to, the trails? She said, yeah, it's pretty close to right when we arrived. Obviously we had to park, but that's when we arrived. He says, so what is the timestamp on that? She says, it says 12:25 p.m. Okay. And then she says, okay. And then did you walk from the Freedom Bridge to the High Bridge? Yes. Did you see any other kids out there that day at 12:25 when you got there? She says, no. Did you see a man? No. Did you see the man that we call Bridge Guy? She says, no. That's it. She's done. So Baldwin comes up and he says, oh, so you got a really good memory, for something that happened more than 7 years ago. So, he's like, this was a day off school, right? A really nice day. And it's your testimony that you saw no other kids that day. That's what your testimony is, that you were out there at 12:30 in the afternoon on a school day, that you had no school, first warm day. And what has been a long winter, and it's your testimony that you don't see any other kids at the trails that day at 12:25. And she says, not that I recall. I don't remember seeing any kids. So at that point, Diener comes in, and he only asked that one question. So that was it. Because she says, yeah, I don't recall seeing anybody. And she said, and then she follows up and says that you were actually questioned pretty close in time to when Abby and Libby went missing. Yes. And she says, at that time, did you tell law enforcement when you got there? She's like, I think so. I believe I would have. And she said, and did you tell them at that point whether or not you had seen anybody in terms of kids or a man out on the trails when you arrived there? And she's like, yeah, I think we said that we didn't. So then Baldwin gets back up and he says, but really, when you went and spoke to law enforcement early on in the case, after you went to go give them your account of that day, you really were focusing on the end of the day, right? Like law enforcement wasn't really talking about when you got there, right? Because that wasn't really an important part of the narrative for them, right? It was what you saw later, right? When you see this person that you described, who then becomes bridge guy, right? That's what they were focused on. And she's like, well, I think they asked like a couple questions about when we got there, but yeah, the focus was definitely on the end when we were leaving. And so that was it. That was it. That was it for Brianne Wilbur. So she was on for maybe a total of 10 minutes.
Any jury reaction?
No, not really. Not to her.
Doesn't seem like it was all that
I think that they did that as kind of a little layer of protection against if any of the jurors are inclined to believe that Rick was out there from 10 to 1:30, or I'm sorry, 12 to 1:30. And that would seem to diffuse that, at least in the state's estimation, with respect to, okay, well, Rick wants to say he was here at 12:30. Well, where the hell is he? Because we just established that these girls, they parked at the Mears entrance. They get up, they take a picture. We know what time they're there. They're at 12:30. That would be right when Rick says he's there. And they walk from the Freedom Bridge all the way to the High Bridge, and you never run into it. You don't see anybody. So where's Rick Allen? Is he a ghost?
I mean, it doesn't make any sense. There was other people there that we've heard that the trails there were a lot of people on the trails. It was a nice day.
I know. I don't know. Like, and I didn't have the rest of my notes with me. I'm sure that we have some folks out there that have pretty thorough timelines, like hint, sleuthy, in terms of the other testimony that came out. At least that came out at trial of people that are known to have been out on that bridge. I don't know if any of them were out there that early. I can't recollect it off the top of my head. So at any rate, and the defense didn't challenge it. Like they didn't come in and say, oh, okay, well, what about so-and-so? They testified in this trial, which you obviously weren't here when they were testifying. You weren't in this courtroom, correct? Yeah. Well, they said they were here at 12:30. How'd you miss them? It's like you would have thought if they could have done that they would have, just so as to say, okay, well, these people were there and you didn't see them. So it's possible you just didn't see Rick Allen, right? That's possible. Like, did you go down the paper trail? Like, you have no idea where Rick Allen was walking that day, right? All you've heard is that he said he was on the trails and then he went to the bridge. You don't know where he went in the hour and a half between, right? He said he was out at the bench at some point. He sat on the bench. Is it possible that he was on the bench when you walked by? I mean, Andy could have gotten into the weeds, but I think he wanted to give the weight that he thought it deserved. And sometimes his lawyers, we may want to go harder to witness and try to get up in their ass and be like, oh no, there's no way, and go through all the stuff. And then sometimes you want to try to just be like, okay, well, this is a nothing burger. So we're not going to even ask you anything beyond the couple questions that we ask because we don't think it proves shit. You know what I'm saying? So I got the sense of that, what it was. So then their second witness that they called was Brian Harshman. Again, he is Indiana State Police. He is what they considered to be the phone guy, who was really eavesdropping guy. He is the guy that listened to the hundreds of hours of all of Rick's phone calls to whoever he was calling, whether it was,
The phone guy, meaning phone calls from jail, prison.
yeah, they called him the phone guy. They like to call everybody the something guy. Like they're
Okay.
the bridge guy, phone guy, whatever guy, that guy, so that's their thing. So Harshman gets up there, McClellan does the direct, and McClellan has this. It's driving me crazy that they made this labeling distinction of a one-man cell as opposed to solid. Like they like to call it, he's in a one-man cell as opposed to he's in solitary, right? He's in a one-man cell. He's not in solitary. He's just in a one-man cell. So he says, so Rick Allen was in a one-man cell in Westville, correct? And he says yes. And he was also in a one-man cell in Wabash, correct? And he's also in a one-man cell in Cass County Jail, isn't he? I said yes. And then at this point, there's a beyond the scope of the defense.
Just gonna ask that. I was just gonna say, how in the hell, except they did put on evidence of his conditions for the false confession. So,
Yeah,
but I don't
exactly.
see how that helps them because now the jury equates their version of a one man cell as hell on earth, and solitary confinement.
Well, I thought that Rosie made, an excellent point. He's like, it's like that's nothing more than a label. Like you're calling, like he's got to just have faith that the jurors have
Or
eyes. They saw
they,
conditions of what
yeah,
he was living
I have
with.
no doubt on that part.
But for from the perspective of the state, the more that they try to hammer the jurors over the head with that concept that there's somehow a difference between it being a one-man cell because he's in safekeeping and we're trying to keep him safe, and the fact that he's in solitary with no human contact other than talking to Walla or getting brought for his vitals to a nurse, that he's got no human contact, because remember the real contact with Kathy in terms of they would go weeks without him being able to contact her. And then
And that
it's
was evident in those calls because they would say things like, "Oh, they're allowing you to call again? Oh, it's
right.
good to hear your voice." I do
Exactly.
think that I'm hoping the jury picked up that they used that to control and manipulate him.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Um,
'Cause I'll have to say,
okay, so
I was talking about this with my sister today, and she was like, she doesn't follow all of this as closely as your, typical, you know, courtroom follower, but in any event, I was explaining that I honestly like, look, in my mind, everything's rested. There's no question, no doubt, 100% that the state has not proved their case beyond a reasonable doubt. And when I try to look at it objectively and be as objective as possible, I honestly think that there's a damn good chance, more likely than not, this guy didn't do it. Um, and but I do fear that the jury is going to come back hung. Is my fear, and then he stays in prison. But uh, I think the jury's definitely not going to buy this distinction of a one man cell after they saw that video.
no, and I like, and I got the impression the one last thing that I forgot to add with respect to talking about kind of the play, kind of the playlist in terms of how Gull thinks this is going to go tomorrow with closings is I got the distinct impression it's going to be Rosie. Now I thought that they were going to do a split closing where Andy would do kind of the timeline stuff, which was really what his focus was on in terms of the witnesses that he was directing and the witnesses that he put on during their case in chief, and whereas Brad was really dealing with the phone issue, the bullet issue, and the confession. So that may still be the case, but the way that it sounded today is Brad was basically doing most of the talking. And if you were to put my feet to the fire and say, who do you think lead counsel was during the case? It was definitely Brad. Brad was definitely like, Gull addressed Brad, like any questions, are you ready for the jury, Mr. Rozzi? It was always Brad. He seemed to be in control in terms of kind of that lead counsel chair. So that would be I don't think it was anything that was ever said like, oh, I'm lead counsel, like Brad's not doing that. And they're a team. It's like you and me. It's like, I never like, there was no lead counsel. It's like, we're just going in and trying a case, and, you kind of like settled into openings and I kind of settled into closings. It easily could have been flip flop. It didn't matter. Like you were our science person. If like we had DNA shit, I'm like, Allie, that's you, girl. That's what you're going to handle. If we had female witnesses, Allie, that's you, girl. You got to take that shit. I don't want to come off as like an aggressive meanie, like going at some poor female witness and like I'm overly aggressive and then the jury hates me, so it's like, all those kinds of things. But Brad and Andy have very, very different personalities. It's kind of like Jorgensen always used to call him and I like the hammer and the scalpel. Like I was the hammer, and then he fancied himself as the scalpel. He's like, yeah, I'm doing the real intricate cuts, and then you're just pounding them over the head with shit. And and with these two guys, it's more like kind of the empath teddy bear, and versus the kind of the more quick-witted and less emotional type lawyer in terms of Brad. Like, they just have very different personalities. Like Andy's the guy that you could see when he's talking about, the impact of this case on Rick Allen and his family, and the fact that they believe, that they adamantly believe that he did not do this. He'll get emotional. So he's that guy. So, all right. So, she allows this to kind of come in to a certain extent, and he says yes, he's had a one-man cell in all those different locations. And he says, as a matter of fact, in Cass he actually has a bit of a bigger cell, right? And he also has a desk, and he's also got kind of a little like day room, right? Like kind of a little sitting area. It's like, he's like, yes, he's like, so it's obviously nicer conditions because it's a newer jail, but he's alone all the time, right? And he says, yeah, but when I say he's not alone, so in Cass, he really has no human contact, right? He's like not allowed to go, he's not out in the yard with people. He's not like, in terms of rec time, he's got no communication with anybody. He's not receiving any kind of
Sitting
like,
with everybody all day long in trial. So, hello.
right. But then he says, whereas when he was at like this concept that they keep trying to make Westville to seem like it wasn't the hellhole it was, seems so disingenuous. He's like, well, because in reality, in Westville, he did have human contact, right? He got to talk to Dr. Wall every day. He would go and see the nurses, and and he also was able to communicate, he said, sometimes with the people that were in his pod, the A pod, right? That he could talk through the wall to them. So he's like, so he actually had the ability to communicate with people, right? And they saw it. It's like you can't unsee what you've seen, right? Like the people all saw the conditions. They saw that he was living like an animal in there, so it comes off as disingenuous to me. So, and like, but at the end of the day, how much weight does that carry with this jury? Does the fact that the state is minimizing completely the conditions in which they put Rick Allen in, does that outweigh the fact that the defense didn't put Rick Allen anywhere after when he left the trails? To me, that's my biggest concern. It's like, I think the state's case is weak as shit. Nothing has changed about that. Nothing. They put on it's like there was an old thing with the Bears head coach when the Bears came back and won this game in like the last 2 minutes when they were down 21 points. And the coach says, the Bears are exactly who we thought they were, which is a shit team. It's like, this case is exactly what I thought it was. There were no surprises. The only thing that you can consider to be a surprise is the white van. Like you are giving that more weight than I am. And you
I'm
might,
taking the jury as a microcosm of the public and social media, and that's even with social media knowing most of it and people at least, responding to people saying, "Oh my goodness, he knew this thing only the killer would know." That no, that's been out there, like that's been long out there.
yeah.
Um,
I mean,
but
and you might be exactly right, because like I've said it. If I've said it once, I've said it a million times. We both have. We never know what a jury's thinking. Like we can sit there for every day from a trial, and we are sitting there trying to like soothsay and be like, oh yeah, that one. Whenever you walk over there, she smiles, or oh, that one seems to like you, or what. None of that shit matters. So it's like you cannot read a juror for shit. You have no idea what they're going to do in any case. You have no idea. It's like even when we're getting these questions from the jury, because I was telling Kathy, we were out to lunch the day of the I think we were out to lunch the day of Oberg, and or no, it was when they put on, it was yesterday. We were out to lunch when we got the questions about the
the bullet,
defense, the bullet guy, and like I told her, I'm like, look, I'm like that question concerns me, because it seems like they're giving weight to Oberg's, sufficient agreement that there's a match in the world of, tool markings. And like, it concerns me. I said, but, we just have to remember that that's one question from one juror out of 12, so you may have one of the jurors saying, "Oh, wow, they got a match on this thing," and buying it. That doesn't mean that the rest of them are all in the same boat. And if you have jurors that are adamant that it was bullshit, so you can only give that the amount of weight that like it. Well, there's one that thinks that bullet's pretty heavy duty, evidence.
well, and that I felt a lot of the jury questions possibly concerned me, but when we turn back to what you were just talking about whether they're thinking, "I really needed to hear from Kathy. I really needed to hear where he was." All you have to hope and kind of really hope is that there's people back there reminding them, but the burden is on the state. The burden
That's
is on the state. The
right. The
burden is
defense
on the
has
state,
to
and if
prove
they
it
can
can.
remember if someone reminds them of that every time they say, "I wish I woulda heard from the defense, blah, blah, blah," but the burden is on the state.
Yeah, definitely, no question about it.
And I'm
Um,
gonna have to sneak off here soon, so
Why? Like, she can wait. Like, the state's 4:18. Just tell her, let's finish. Like, this isn't gonna be a long one. Like, there
alright,
was like, we got this witness who's almost done, and then we've got their last witness, and then
okay.
that's it. Like, so
And then we got your question, guys, don't forget, we'll get
yeah,
to you.
we're gonna definitely get all your questions. We love your questions. We love it. Oh, and I know Allie thanked you guys, and we're excited. We passed 30. Our little channel, our baby channel is growing. Just past 30K. So that's super exciting. We're super grateful to all of you that have subbed and like spending time with us, whether you love us or you hate us. We love that you're here. We hope that we give you some good content. We hope that maybe we teach you a little something every once in a while. We hope that we give you some insight from the defense attorney's perspective, because it's good. It's good whether you're a prosecutor fan in terms of you love the state just in general, you think they're heroic. It's always good to get the
Both
view from
sides.
both sides,
Right,
always.
and while we're addressing it, about one-third of you haven't liked this yet, so if you do like the content, just minimize that chat and hit thumbs up. We would greatly appreciate it, and it's free.
You guys know Allie's all over that. I was listening to Allie kind of give the intro. I mean, she's better at like, share, subscribe, do all the things that help us grow the show. You're great at that. Like, you're better at it than I am. So hats off to you, my damn. All right. So uh at that point, so he's talking about Cass. He makes he's trying to delineate that he's actually got it worse off at Cass, even though it's a brand new prison, even though he's got a regular bed, even though he's got a desk and he's got a little day room where he can relax. It was better when he was in the shit infested, fucking rat infested hellhole. That was better, right? When he was psychotic, that was a better place to be. So like that was kind of the
He was
so then
right
at
where
this
he
point,
needed to be.
right? So at
Or
this
was that
point,
witness who said that? I can't recall, maybe it was a different one.
was that Harshman? That might have been Harshman, or that might have been Holman.
It might have been Holman.
One.
Okay.
I can't remember. So he then says, okay, back to Westville. You remember when he was eating paper and flushing paper down the toilet? Objection. Brad objects. He's like, this thing is way
Not
beyond
proper
scope.
rebuttal.
It's
Right.
not proper rebuttal. We didn't bring any of this up in our case in chief. She agreed. She
Good
shut
job.
that down. And then he does it again. He's like, okay. And he's like, so now that he's in CAS, he's had some issues while he's at CAS, hasn't he? He's been threatening staff. Objection. So Nick gets it out there again. Gets the words threatening staff out there. Rozzi objects. Again, this is beyond the scope. We didn't bring anything even remotely like this up in our case in chief. Sustained.
And it had already been something the judge addressed and said wasn't getting in. At this point, I almost wish they would just tell the people that the reason that happened was they cut off his phone calls with his family.
Yeah, I mean, she gave a limiting
instruction? Oh, good.
Yeah,
Or a curative instruction.
curative instruction. She said, she basically just told him to disregard the comment, which.
And it's not true, by the way, or there's proper reason someone would get that angry.
What? Oh, yeah, for sure. For sure. All right. So that was it. He was done. No cross.
No cross, no questions.
Nope. Like he wasn't pretty, like he was pointless.
Worthless. Yeah.
He was a completely pointless witness. So the last person they bring on is Dr. John Martin.
And this is a witness we have not heard from before?
He was a witness that we have not heard from. He is the psychiatrist that was giving Rick Allen his Haldol shots.
All right.
Okay, so kind of his background. He grew up in India. Like, so like he clearly changed his name. I'm like, when he got on the stand, I'm like, oh, he looks like a nice Indian guy. And, because he clearly was Indian and he must've changed his name. Like he clearly wasn't a Martin. I guess, are there Martins? I'm used to most Indians. Like I've had a lot of Indian friends and like he looked like a Patel, like he just,
all right, move on.
So, it turns out that he did his schooling in India. He went to the St. John's Medical School in India, and then at some point he moved to the States. He had to do certain things where they acknowledged his medical degree here. He was able to start practicing medicine here. He's always kind of been, for like the last 30, 40 years, he's worked in the Department of Corrections. We knew a doctor that worked in the Department of Corrections. Do you remember that doctor that worked in the Department of Corrections?
Yes, I do.
Yeah. So long timer. He was down in Miami for years working in corrections, worked at a bunch of different places. It sounded like he was kind of job hopping, worked in 5 different jails and a few different prisons down in Florida. Ultimately, and that was from like, I think up until like when he got to the States. And then he did his residency in 83 through 86 at Jackson Memorial Hospital in Florida. In 86, he was licensed in Florida. And then in 87, he got licensed in both Indiana and Illinois. We know how easy it is to get your medical license, especially back then. Actually, our client is why they changed the rules in terms of licensing in Illinois. Yeah. And we know how it is from Indiana because that's where Garcia was from. That's where he was living. It was not a difficult process there either, unless they found some just glaring warts. So at some point, he starts working for the, Department of Corrections down there. In 2020, he moves to Indiana and he starts working for within the Indiana Department of Corrections. He has worked in some form or fashion in corrections for 40 to 45 years, jails, prisons, women's prisons. And he says that over all his years that he's visited 16 major prisons as a psychiatrist. And the nature of his employment with respect to the IDOC was that he was working down in Joliet, Illinois, up until 7/20. And at that point, he was called in November of 2022 when the preceding psychiatrist retired, who was the Westville psychiatrist that was supplied again by Centurion, which was the same company that supplied Walla. So he wasn't an IDOC employee. Okay, he was just somebody who was placed in there. Like Centurion reminds me of, it's like a temp agency, except for prisons. They just supply prisons with doctors. It's a third party.
Right, which is why Walla wouldn't wanna be throwing everybody and their mother under the bus because she still works for that company, even though
Exactly.
she's not in Indiana or
Yeah,
at
she's
that same prison.
right. She's in a different spot.
A whole different state. Yeah.
Exactly. Exactly. So uh, he says in 2022 that again his predecessor retired, and that they had a huge backlog. That there was a backlog of inmates slash patients that needed to be seen, and that they were so far behind it that they needed him to come up and help. He says that he went and he reviewed all the notes of his predecessor regarding these inmate patients. And he says that sometime in November of 2022, that was the first time that he met Rick Allen. So, and Diener was doing this direct. So she says, "Did you have a place where you could go and make records?" He's like, "No, not really." He's like, I had an office. Like he was not a great witness for the state, and he was pretty helpful for the defense. Is basically the way this shakes down, because he was pretty honest. He said it was he's like, I didn't really have an office where I could go and do work. He's like, there was a unit, a very secure unit called the WCU, and he talked way too much. Like Diener kept trying to shut him down because he would go into these long diatribes, and she's like, "No, no, quit, sir. You have to quit. Like, you're saying too much." So he says that there was an office within the WCU that he had somewhere they could go in there and he could prepare and jot down his notes. And so he says that Rick Allen was initially kept in the WCU, or that he was always kept in the WCU from the entire time that he treated him. And he said that he was initially transferred from a jail, from what he knew, as a safekeeper in order to keep him safe. And then she asked him, "Were you an employee of the IDOC, Indiana Department of Correction?" He says, "No, I was an employee of Centurion." And she said, "So when you would treat Richard Allen, would you take notes?" And he says, "Well," he's like, I didn't have a chart or anything." He said, I would jot down notes on a piece of paper." And she said, and at some point, you'd then go enter that information on a computer." And then he gave the kind of the wrong answer. He's like, "Oh, well, maybe like at some point." So she's like, eventually you would get that somehow into a computer system, right? He's like, "Oh, yes, I think that, yes."
So he
So,
wasn't even sure he got that stuff into a computer.
I mean, like, I don't know. Like the answer wasn't really clear. I'm assuming that he got something in there because they had the notes. So yes, at some point he was able to get those entered into a database. And then so she asks him, "Were you aware of what Rick Allen's medication protocol was when he got there and prior to?" He says, "Yes, when he came in, I saw what his regimen was, and that when I first met with him, I reviewed it, and I saw that he was taking uh, Prozac because he was suffering from both a major depressive disorder as well as anxiety." And she says, "Okay." And then she says, "Okay, well, in terms of the first time that you met Rick Allen, were you aware or were you not aware of whether or not he was currently taking his medications?" And so then he goes into one of his long diatribes. She has to try to rein him in, rein him in. "Relax, doctor. You're saying way too much shit." Because he's like, "Oh, well, the nurses would keep what we call an MAR, which is a medical administrative record, and that would note whether or not he was taking his meds, his prescribed meds. So, like, if he was on Prozac, on this sheet that I would look at, if there was a circle on a date, that would tell me that he didn't take his medications on that particular date once we kept him on Prozac initially when he was incarcerated." So he's like, "Yes." He's like, "I was aware of what he was taking, and I was aware if he would be taking it daily or if there were times when he was refusing to take his meds." And so then she enters State's Exhibit 19, 319, which she says Do you recognize these? He's like, yes, these are notes that I wrote regarding my patient in terms of the prescriptions, my observations of what I saw. And it shows that I wrote a prescription for Prozac, but it was actually the generic, just the generic version of Prozac. So she gets that in. States 320, do you recognize that? He's like, okay, these are records that basically determine if, again, that Richard Allen was taking his meds. So it was the MARs that I was just talking about, the medical administration records. And Rozzi objects. He says, look, he's like, I see your initials here a couple times, but like I see all kinds of initials on these sheets. I'm objecting on the grounds of hearsay. These are clearly like none of these people have testified. None of these people are coming here to testify. So she lets it in over objection. He says to these, he's like, so yes, like sometimes I would recognize, I would look at it, and sometimes he didn't look at it religiously in terms of determining whether or not Rick was taking his meds every day. And so Rozzi asks a preliminary question. He says, oh, this is where he says this thing. Do you recognize any of the other initials in these records? In 320, he says, yes. He says, objection to hearsay, admits it over objection. Sorry, I said that before I was reading. I sometimes I recollect things before I read the notes that I actually took. So then he made reference to knowing that Richard Allen had entered IDOC as a safekeeper. He says, yes, I see that. And there's a reference of solitary confinement. And then Diener says, do you understand the difference between a safekeeper and solitary confinement? And he says, yes. He's like, solitary confinement is punitive in nature. That's typically when somebody has done something wrong, that they've misbehaved and now they're being punished. Whereas a safekeeper is somebody that's kept in an individual, in a one-person cell, in order to keep them safe because there's some threat to their safety that exists. And she says, as far as you were aware, was Richard Allen being treated as a safekeeper? He says, yes, as far as I know, that he was being treated as a safekeeper. And so she says, have you ever treated safekeepers? He says, I have treated safekeepers. However, they were in Gen Pop. So, you've got this weird dichotomy where, okay, there is
you have a safekeeper in solitary
in a one-man cell and not in Gen Pop, but you've got safekeepers that are in Gen Pop, where that's like the equivalent of being in the shit if you're enlisted in the military and you're in the war. Like, I was in the military during the war. Well, were you in the shit? Yeah, I was in the shit. That meant that you were out in combat. So like that was like, I was like, wow, that's something else. Like, that's what I'm saying. Like, he had so many answers that were truthful that just didn't help the state. So, and then she says, well, and again, there's a difference between, like a safekeeper in a one-man cell, right? Like, or solitary confinement in a one-man cell. He's like, yes, though it's the same room.
Right. Thank God.
Right. He says, and he went on, he said more. He's like, there is that, punitive connotation with solitary confinement. He says, though he was being treated as though he had done something wrong.
Wow.
Talking about Richard Allen, which was also in his mind, that like, I'm being treated as if I had done something wrong, and then they're keeping me in solitary. And he said, and he says he says this exact, and I quote, he says, and that is wrong in a way. He's like, so he was kind of helpful. Like, I saw Rozzi like lean back in his chair a little bit. He's like, all right, this guy,
I love this.
Right. This guy's not really hurting us all that much. So,
and did you happen to notice at that point any jury reaction, or are you too busy?
The jury was feverishly taking notes, because like when he would say something like that, I'm immediately looking at the jury. Right. I'm like, does that resonate? So yeah, they were taking diligent notes. Like, and I'm going to compliment the jury all day, every day, because they have been an incredibly attentive jury. They've struck me with their intelligence in terms of the questions they ask. I've never seen one of them dozing off. I've never seen one of them like just kind of daydreaming. I just like, they've been a super attentive jury. It's the most you can hope for, and no matter which way this verdict comes down, I'll always accept the verdict of a jury that sat there attentively. They heard the evidence, and I can't dispute that when they've heard the evidence and they make whatever decision they make in terms of innocence or guilt, you have to accept it.
Well, I might
It doesn't
disagree
mean I
with
have
you,
to
but I won't
agree with
blame them.
right. Right. It doesn't mean I agree with them, but I certainly accept it, no matter what it is, because I know that they were attentive. I know I saw the same evidence they had, and they reached a conclusion. No matter which way it goes, you have to accept it when you have a jury that has been this attentive, this bright. You know that they went back. Like, this isn't going to be a fast verdict. Like, there's no
Who
way.
knows? All of this talking and everything that's sort of different, I guess we'll
That
have to
is different. That is
I was
different.
suspecting it might be faster than it might have otherwise been because of all of that.
That is very different, and I know that we've talked about it a little bit, and just kind of to restate it, like in our state, our primary practice state, Illinois, the jurors are not allowed to discuss the case prior to the going into deliberations ever. And here they are allowed to discuss amongst themselves the facts that they've heard and evidence. Like they're allowed to do it. So Allison's right. They could very well be ahead of the game in terms of deliberations. They could theoretically have been somewhat quasi deliberating all throughout this trial on a day by day basis. Now, because I don't know how much time they get to spend with one another while they're sequestered. I imagine that they're not keeping them in their rooms like prisoners. I imagine that they're allowed to go, and they probably have a room where they're allowed to go and congregate and talk with one another and relax, and probably watch whatever movies that they've approved them to watch. So it's it's probably like a seniors home, like where they have that room where all the seniors come out in the common area and they sit and they'll put a movie on. It's movie night. It's movie night for all the seniors. You guys were going to play on Golden Pond, something like that. So, the point being that they've been able to discuss this where that is not the norm, at least in our state. So he then continues. He says that it was it was a threat to his mental health, that he felt that it was a threat to his mental health, keeping him in solitary or the one-man cell. And he said, but the overriding decision, that even though that it was a threat to his mental health and that this was discussed in meetings, but that the overriding decision was to keep him safe. And then that took precedent over his mental well-being. And which I just thought was very telling. I just thought it was a very honest answer. So then the next question was, but you don't know who made that decision, do you? In terms of deciding that it was more important. We know it was Judge Gull. Judge Gull made that decision. She is the one who decided to keep him safe, even though there had been no evidence. I never want you guys to forget this, that when Richard Allen was deemed to be a safekeeper, that happened at a point in time when he had no counsel and he was not present. He was not present in court the day that hearing took place. If you want to call it a hearing, it wasn't an actual hearing. It was basically, I think, Tony Liggett going in and saying, hey, gee, I think that somebody might try to kill Richard Allen. And, during that June safekeeping hearing, Rose put it to him. He's like, okay, well, who said that? Did you ever actually hear an actual threat from anybody? No, it was just a feeling. Did you ever see anybody try to harm Richard Allen? No, it was just, I just thought, based on everything that had preceded this, in terms of what this case has been in the social media and out in the public, that somebody was going to try to get to him. That was it. But Richard Allen went without any due process under the law and without him having representation, and they deemed him to be a safekeeper. Whereas if he had counsel at that point, they could have argued to keep him out of that, because at this, we know that he's been in Cass County since she finally relented and said, okay, I'm gonna pull him out of Wabash and we're gonna put him in to Cass, whenever that was, a few months ago. And it could have been that way all along, because at that hearing in June of 23, it was evident that Cass County, which had the new facility, could take him, even though they said we don't want him, but we can handle him, and she denied it. So everything that took place after the fact was Gull. And, she had the ability to, but at that point, to be honest, the damage had been done. Like, his psychosis started in April, which we're about to get to. So then she says, we had a lot of meetings, and there was the warden there. There were, IDOC lawyers there. There were doctors there about the ways to make him more comfortable.
Sure.
And he says, well, comfortable. He's like, yeah, we had We had offered to give him a TV. We wanted to give him a tablet, because like making him more comfortable is just putting him in the position of every other pretrial detainee in the state that has access to tablets and has access to the ability to watch TV and all those things. So they weren't trying to make him more comfortable. They were trying to situate him the way that every other pretrial detainee in the state and in our state is treated pretrial, as opposed to treating him like a convicted felon in the worst of the worst, in the most secure cell in the entire state of Indiana.
They were
Like
trying
that's
to make his horrible conditions have a little more, of the things that a pretrial detainee would have without
right.
actually changing his condition. Now I have a question, and maybe it's something that comes out later, but did he say when this meeting was about wanting to give him a tablet? Because that indicates he
So
didn't even have a tablet by that point.
this, I am imagining they did not specify the date, but this had to have been early April when he started manifesting all the indicia of psychosis. Like it had to have been at that point. And we're about to get right to there because it's like getting into this. So, but they didn't delineate the date of that meeting. But it couldn't have been early because when she's about to get into the questions, like the first time he sees him, the second time he sees him, and what his prognosis was of whether or not Richard Allen was in good mental health at that time to when he just devolves. So she says, he's like, were you aware of the fact that he was on suicide watch? He's like, yes. So again, this has to be moving up until the April time period. He's like, yeah, I had heard by reading through the notes that he had suicidal ideation and that he had done something to try to harm himself. Because by the time that I saw him in April, he had a suicide blanket, and then he also was wearing the the suicide gown, that kind of the Fred Flintstone looking thing. So then Rosie says, well, I'd like to ask a foundational question. He said, you only met with him 18 times in 13 months, correct? He says, yes. He's like, did you ever review any of the videos, his incel videos? He says, no, I didn't. He's like, did you ever review any of his camcorder transport videos? He says, no, I did not. He said, but I did see it, like, and then he'd be trying to talk. And he'd say, oh, I did see him moved. And Rosie'd say, there's no question pending. You answered the question, quit talking. So he at that point, he objected to foundation. He says that he has no personal knowledge of how he would occasionally get out of his cell, because at this point, Diener's again trying to establish, like, even though he was in a one-man cell, that he got out of his cell, as opposed to like people that are in solitary confinement. They never get out of their cell unless, of course, they're getting treatment. If they're on suicide watch, would seem to go hand in hand, typically, depending on the amount of time that you're in solitary. So she's trying to establish he would go out. He'd have meetings with Dr. Walla daily, right? And he'd get to go to that 3x3 Hannibal Lecter cell and stand in there and talk to Walla. And he'd get to go get his vitals taken by the nurses, right? So he was interacting with people. He wasn't in there all alone. He'd get to call like Kathy on his tablet, right? And sometimes they'd let him out and he'd make calls on the phone, or they'd hand him the phone and he'd make calls, because I guess there was like a house phone in there that would get spread around the different inmates, that they'd all use this one phone. So he's like, yeah, whatever. So in terms of his actual meetings with Alan, the first one was in November 22nd. So the date that he was moved out there, he said that he looked at his notes and he saw that he had been diagnosed previously with major depressive disorder and anxiety. And he was taking meds. He was on Prozac at that point. When's the next time you met him? And she said, well, what do you, when you observed him at that point, was he exhibiting any kind of psychosis or any kind of symptoms of psychosis? Says, no, he seemed normal. November 29th is the next time he meets him. Said same. At that point, he was not exhibiting any symptoms of psychosis. January 29th is the next time that he meets with him. And he says, at that point, I was trying to get him to sign a consent for medication. It's important for us as the doctors. We really want him to be able to, give informed consent. And then he starts going to this long description of informed consent. And the judge is like, can you reel your guy in? We don't need to, this whole thing on what informed consent is. So she reels him in. And then the answer is, well, since Mr. Allen was doing well, I was allowed to see him because I had observed him those 3 times, and all of those 3 times he seemed to be doing okay. I was then allowed to only see him every 6 months or 3 months, depending on circumstances. And then she says, okay, well, despite the fact that was taking place in terms of you not having to come see him as frequently, did you come see him in April? As a matter of fact, on April 13th of 2023, he says, yes. And she says, okay, well, was that a planned visit? He said it was not planned. He said, I received a call from Dr. Wrightwood, and she said that we need you in here immediately. He's exhibiting some very bizarre symptoms, and we'd like you to come in and see if he needs to be medicated. So she says, what did you do? He said, well, I came to the prison. I came to Westville. And then I was met by the warden. And then I went and they brought me to the WCU. And then they brought me to Allen's cell. And I observed that he was lying naked in his cell, that he had feces smeared all over him. And I saw this brownish liquid coming out from his mouth. It was clear that he had been eating his feces. I immediately said, I need to speak with him. And then he says this, he says, the guards actually dragged him to the showers. And then they washed him down and they gave him a new suicide gown. And at that point, his presentation was very different. Like it was very different from the first 3 times I'd seen him. I immediately determined that he was psychotic. And he says, in the process of interviewing him, that I observed 2 things. He says, well, in the process of interviewing anybody, I'm always looking for 2 things. I'm looking for judgment, and I'm looking for insight. And I could tell upon speaking with him that a person, because he says typically a person will have a fair amount of understanding of the situation they're in. That's the insight portion. And as far as the judgment portion, I'm trying to determine if they can make the right decisions for themselves. At that point in time, I felt that Richard Allen was deficient on both counts. Therefore, I decided that he was probably going to need some involuntary medication. And as a matter of fact, on that date, I decided that it was proper for involuntary medication because I did not believe that he was able to consent. I didn't find that he was competent. And I decided that he needed the Haldol shots.
But did you think he was faking, sir?
Yeah, the malingering comes up very briefly later. And so he says, at that point, that's not a decision I'm going to make by myself. I called kind of the supervisor that oversees all of us, all the doctors. I called Dr. William Hayes. I explained my findings to him. We then brought a 3rd doctor in, Dr. Bernard. And then also we consulted with Dr. Walla, who had been seeing him frequently. And then that meeting took place the very next day after I met with him and saw the conditions of and his symptoms. And the 3 of us all agreed that he was psychotic. Therefore, it was determined that he should be involuntarily medicated. And at that point, the findings of what may happen on the medication, that's what we discussed. And then we decided that we were going to have to monitor them very closely and then obviously report on the treatment. And that is all located on my report of treatment form. So all of that discussion that we had, that's all indicated there. So he says on the top of the form, you can see there's a checkbox there. And below that, it says involuntary medication. And then below there's a section where it says basis for the decision. There's where I documented the reasoning for the involuntary medication. And he says, and I just want to make clear that it was a panel decision. It was a panel decision to give the Haldol. It wasn't any one individual. It was a panel of us all discussing it, and we all reached the same conclusion. So then Diener asked, well, can you briefly describe the medication regimen that he was on? There's an objection because he starts going on a tangent. He went on a lot of tangents. He was a tangent guy. It's kind of like me, goes on tangents all the time. So they had to reel his ass in. And so he says, well, first of all, we have to make sure that he has no allergies. So we want to make sure, because we don't know, he's never taken Haldol before. Want to make sure he doesn't have any kind of adverse effects from taking the Haldol. Again, he starts going off. And then Rozzi makes another objection, non-responsive. Let's like he's not answering the question. So okay, so initially what we do is we give him what we determine or what we call short acting Haldol, which is a 5 milligram, which is low end. He's like, as far as like the scale of short acting Haldol, it's like it goes anywhere from 400 or 5 milligrams up to 100 milligrams. We gave him on the low end. We gave him 5 just to make sure that he wasn't allergic. So we gave him that on April 14th, 15th, 16th, and 17th. He was given an injection. He had no adverse reaction to that. So at that point, we decided to shift him over to the long-acting Haldol. We prescribed him 50 milligrams, which if you look over the course, which lasts for 30 days, if you break that down, that's the equivalent to just about 2 milligrams per day. Just keep in mind that the max that we can give anybody is 450 milligrams for long-acting. Okay, so just to give you an idea of where he fell in that scale. And so then she asked, well, how frequently did you see him? He says, well, I saw him on 4/18, and there was some slight improvement. He was still presenting as psychotic. And then on 4/25, I saw him again. He was still presenting as psychotic with some minimal improvement. At that point, he wasn't spreading feces all over himself and eating it anymore. As he was on the 13th at the height of his psychosis. And then he said, and just so you understand, on the 13th, he was hallucinating. He was responding to voices, to people that were not there. He was full-blown psychotic that day. So he says on April 25th, there was no evidence, again, of smearing himself in the feces. And he did recognize me. As a matter of fact, when he was not talking, he was not responsive. But when I left, he called out to me. He said, "Doctor." So I knew that he was somewhat there. And he also seemed to have an understanding that he was in prison. So in a sense, he was becoming orientated to the fact that he knew me, and he also understood that he was in prison. However, he was asking for his wife. He asked for the warden. He asked for some chocolates. He asked for some Taco Bell. And then he said his memory did not seem to be affected. And then he says, so when's the next visit? He says, the next visit was on May 2nd of 2023. At that point, I got to his cell. I observed that he was lying on a mattress. Again, he had his suicide gown on, and his suicide blanket was on top of him. I did notice that there was water on the floor. At this point, I did not notice any kind of symptomatic hallucinations. There was no evidence to me on 5/2 of any kind of psychosis. I came back on 5/8. My observations is that at this point he was speaking with looseness. He denied having any kind of hallucinations. He was eating his meals for the most part. He had been meeting with Walla pretty consistently. He was still on suicide watch. And at that time, he did not show any signs of psychosis. Again, I came back on 5/23. That was the next meeting. No evidence of psychosis. On 5/30, my observations, again, no evidence of psychosis. He was eating. His speech was coherent. He had been, again, meeting with Walla. And then he may have spoken at some point with his wife. And quote, everything was fine, is what he says. Diener then skips to, okay, well, I want to turn your attention to 6/20 of 2023. He says, okay, well, I got there. Again, there was no evidence of psychosis. He was non-symptomatic at that point for 7 weeks. So at that point, I ordered that the injections be stopped. His speech was coherent. He was not showing any kind of signs of having hallucinations. So I felt comfortable in stopping the Haldol injections. And then she says, okay, was there anything else that you noted on this date? He says, well, and he paused. He gave like a long pause here. And he says, well, he did say something to me that day. And, I just want to say that it was unprovoked. I had not asked him anything. There was no pressure applied by me or anybody else around him. And then he said these words to me. And then he waited for like 15 seconds. He said to me, I would like to apologize to the families. And that's it. And at that point, and then she said, and then did you continue to see him after 6/20 of 2023? He says, yes, I saw him a few more times before he was eventually transferred. And then so she asked the question, what is Haldol? He's like, well, people that have psychosis, they've, the best way to describe it is they've lost contact with reality. They have hallucinations that are vivid for them. That becomes their reality. They can't make a distinction between what is real and what is not. The Haldol is used to try to bring them back to reality. And then she asked the question, psychosis can come from other things, correct? And one of those things would be abuse of illicit drugs. He says, yes, that can send people into a psychotic state. And isn't it true that there is also, it could be a problem with his current medications? Rozzi objects. This is facts, not in evidence. There was no evidence whatsoever that any of his medications, the Prozac or anything else, is what may have caused his psychosis. The judge agreed. She sustained it. He said, and frankly, Your Honor, the only talk of that being an issue was not with relation to psychosis, but instead it was really with respect to delirium. And she says, the judge says, yeah, I recall. You're correct. So she sustained that. At that point, Diener asks, would refusing the Prozac play any role, in your opinion, in the onset of the psychosis? And he says, in my opinion, no. So, which is the opposite of what Westcott was saying, the defense witness, wherein she was very clear that, when you come into a situation where you have both major depressive disorder as well as anxiety, and then you exacerbate it with things such as keeping somebody in solitary, cutting them off from all communications from their loved ones and their support system, that those things can really trigger turning major depressive disorder and anxiety into full-blown psychotic symptoms. So at that point, she's done. Rozzi comes in for the cross. He starts attacking him immediately in terms of his background. He says, you have no bachelor's degree from any accredited American university. Isn't that correct? He said, yes, I do not. And he says, as a matter of fact, you had many different jobs in Florida, right? Like you were kind of bouncing around and kind of trying to find a home. He says, yeah, a little bit. I was having a hard time finding a place to land. He says, as a matter of fact, you were terminated from one of your jobs. And he says, and really that was in relation to a job in corrections. And it really was related to solitary confinement, correct? He's like, as a matter of fact, you were named in a lawsuit that was related to the Oscar back case. I was trying to write it down. I wrote it as OSCARBACK. It's the way it sounded, Oscar back case down in Florida. And that was a lawsuit relating to inmates that were being kept in solitary confinement and these horrible conditions and, the psychosis and all the stuff that was happening to them. And so there was an objection by Diener there. And then so they went and sidebarred it. He came back. And so obviously she sustained it because he moved on. And he says, well, isn't it true that it's very challenging to treat somebody who is in solitary confinement? And he said, yes, it is. And he says, so when you're working in a prison in Michigan City, at that point, isn't it true that you were, he said that you were then summoned to Westville? He says, yes. And he said, so when you got there, at that point, there was a backlog of over 200 inmates who needed treatment. He says, yes, it was kind of a nightmare scenario in terms of the amount of inmates that needed treatment. So he's like, so it's safe to say that you weren't able to spend any kind of significant amount of time with any of those inmates because you were trying to get caught up in terms of all of these inmates that needed treatment. He says, yeah, that's true. So then he starts talking about serious mental illness. And he says, doctor, what is that? There's an objection by Diener. She says, I don't think that he has, I'm going to ask some foundational questions. She's like, do you have any idea about, the inner workings of prisons in terms of how they classify things such as serious mental illness? He's like, well, yeah, I know, he's like, I've worked in prisons for a long time. So she allows Rozzi some leeway. He says, so how would you describe his serious mental illness, doctor? He says, well, when, like sometimes if people come in showing symptoms of schizophrenia or, for instance, major depressive disorder, those are considered to be serious mental illness. And then so Rosie says, well, isn't it true, doctor, that solitary confinement can exacerbate in somebody that has a serious mental illness? He says, I agree with that. Yes. He says, question, can you make, he says, let me see, I was writing a little sloppy here. He says also with somebody with a serious mental illness cannot exacerbate and turn into a more accelerated state of psychosis. Can that make it happen more quickly? He says, yes, possibly it can. And he says, so out of these 18 meetings, isn't it true that your longest meeting that you ever had with them is 30 minutes? He's like, yes, most of the time they were very short. He said, and sometimes your meetings were with guards present. He says, yes. He said most of them were. And he said some of them were at door meetings, meaning that you just went to the door of his cell and spoke to him from outside the door and he was in his cell. He says, yes, that's accurate. And then he said, so from 124 of 23 through 413 of 23, isn't it true that you had zero contact with Richard Allen? He said, yes, that is true. And he says, wouldn't it be true that Dr. Walla was in a better position to treat him than you were? And he says, yes. And he's talking about the door cell visits. He's like, those would typically only last a few minutes, correct? He's like, yes, that's true. And then Rosie asks him the same thing. He's like, did you ever watch any of the in-cell videos of Richard Allen during the times at any point? He says, no, I didn't. He says, did you ever watch any of the transport camcorder videos? He says, no, I didn't. And he said, on 413, you had him diagnosed as very psychotic, correct? He said, yes. And he said, then you also administered the short-term Haldol, correct? And then you did that 3 times. So originally you did it on April 14th, and then you gave him another. But after that, you switched it over to long-term and you gave him a long-term shot on April 18th or 14th, May 18th, and then again on June 15th. And he said 15th or 16th. And he said that you're administering that to someone. And he said the fact that you're still administering that means that you're administering to someone who is psychotic. And then he said he answered real quickly and he said yes. And then he tried to expand on it, like, because the point being is that even though they may not be presenting as psychotic later on as they're in the second and third month, the fact of the matter is that they are, and that the drug is just tamping down the symptoms because they're trying to pull them back to reality. So like Rosie's like, no, he's like, there's no question pending. You answered it. So, and he said that, you understood that he had been diagnosed with major depressive disorder. He said, yes. And he says, isn't it true that major depressive order will be exacerbated when he's separated from his family and when he's incarcerated in solitary confinement, and that he's treated poorly by other inmates? And he says, yes, I agree with all those things. And he said, did you report in any records your concern about a meeting with his lawyers at some point? And he said, yes, I did. And you said that you were concerned with him meeting with his lawyers because it might make things even worse. Isn't that true? And he said, well, he said, yes, I did say that. And he said, but you had no idea what was being said at all between Richard Allen and his attorneys, correct? He says, that's correct. He says, so that was pure speculation. Isn't that correct? You had no clue what we were talking to him about, right? He says, yes. He's like, so in retrospect, you probably shouldn't have made that comment, right? Yeah, I probably shouldn't have. So he said, the next thing he says, well, if he's engaging in paranoid thoughts, he said at some point you noted that he was engaging in paranoid thoughts, that he thought that one lawyer was the good cop and the one lawyer was the bad cop. Now, who do you like? I was sitting there thinking, I'm like, oh yeah, I think he would definitely have Rosie as the bad cop and Andy as the good cop. Like, I think that would have played out like in Rick's mind, that's who it would have been. And he says, well, I didn't observe that. He's like, Walla told me about that. And then he says, okay. And he says, have you ever been, and then Rosie asked a question, have you ever treated a pretrial detainee in a prison in your entire, that being kept in solitary confinement in your entire career? And then he says, yes. And then Rosie's going to impeach him. he's like, do you remember your October 2nd deposition? Diener objects. She says that this is beyond the scope. Gull agrees, so he moves on. And he says, was Mr. Allen's, so he couches in a different way. He says, was Mr. Allen's situation unique to you? Like in terms of all the people that you've treated, was his situation unique to you? He says, I would have to say, yes, it was. It was unique. He says, so while you were working, he's like, well, while you were treating Mr. Allen, you were actually working from an office at the Indiana State Police. Isn't that correct? He says, yes, I was. He said, so you were actually working in an office in the Indiana State Police while you were treating inmates at Westville, correct? He says, yes. Diener objects. He's like, I think that she overruled it. And at that point, she says, I'm going to give him, you can ask it. He says, yes. And he says, isn't it true that you were administering meds from your desk in Michigan City to inmates at Westville? And he said, yeah, yes, I did that once, just once. And then he says, and what, are you aware of someone else? He's like, are you aware of anyone that was a threat to Richard Allen as you sit here today? Did you ever hear from anybody that there was a specific threat against Richard Allen? And he says, no, no one in general. It was just a thought, that there was a thought that, he would be in danger, that there would be a threat to his health and safety if he wasn't in safekeeping. At that point, there's another objection by Diener in terms of relevance. So he then asks, and it was sustained. So the next question was, when you met with Richard Allen in November of 22, there were no lawyers present, correct? He says, that's correct. There were no lawyers there. And he said there wasn't really ever an assessment done at that point, correct? He says, yes, there was no assessment done. I just read, the records that they had from whatever that intake was that's supposed to last a week to 2 weeks, that really took place in a day or two for Allen, and then they moved him to Westville. And then, so in terms of background information, you had noted that in your notes that Richard Allen had used alcohol prior to incarceration. There was another objection in terms of relevance. And he said, you stated, which was sustained, he says that you stated that solitary is punitive, right? He said, wouldn't you agree with the proposition that it's more confusing, that fact, that being the case, that it's even more confusing to someone who did not deserve to be or know why that they're in solitary? Wouldn't that be more confusing to that person, not knowing why they're in there? He says, yes, I agree with that proposition. I do. And so he says, Rozzi then asked, so you said you tried to make Richard Allen more comfortable. He says, well, it's like, yes, it was a group. It was the warden. And Rozzi says, oh, the warden was in there trying to make Richard Allen more comfortable? Really? Okay. He says, and Dr. Walla and other doctors and these MTT meetings, there was Dr. Stuart Bonner. And then he said, oh, well, he's like, with respect to Dr. Stuart Bonner, he was never on site, correct? He never saw Richard Allen. Yeah, that's correct. And then, but also Dr. Mays, he's like, oh, well, with respect to Dr. Mays, he never interacted with Richard Allen, correct? He was never on site, correct? Correct on both counts. And he says, Rozzi then asked, because Richard Allen was a safekeeping, your job was to keep him alive, correct? And then the answer, he says, well, he laughs. He says, well, that wasn't my job, but that was the prison's job. And then he says, okay, we're going to switch gears here. He's like, I'm looking at your medicine management notes, and we're going to switch to 6/20 of 2023. And you had claimed on direct examination that this is the day that he made the statement. You said that he was oriented, that he understood his person, he understood people, his place, time. He was showing that he was oriented, and that he showed no signs of psychosis. And that is the day that you say that he wanted to apologize to the families. So you're saying that he was presenting as normal that day, right? So at this point, Rozzi says, okay, Your Honor, I want to play the video, which is already in evidence, which has been published to the jury at this point. I want to show the video from 6/20 of 2023, his transport video. And this happens to be, it starts at 10:52 a.m. And but I'm going to skip to 12:30 to 1 o'clock. We're going to show that. And so there's, a little bit of debate. She allows him to do it. They don't turn the screen, so we actually get to see this video, whereas we hadn't gotten to see any of the other ones. It was gut-wrenching to watch Richard Allen watch that. He couldn't watch it. He was crying. He had his hand over his face. Kathy's sitting 2 seats away from me crying, and Richard kept looking over at her. And this wasn't one where, like, this isn't the horrors of the cell. This is him just sitting in this chair getting his vitals taken by a doctor or a nurse. I'm assuming it was a nurse. And he is sitting there and he's like this for 20 minutes, completely vegetative, completely catatonic, like doesn't say a word. You see the nurse talking to him for 20 minutes, doesn't say a word, doesn't make eye contact with him. So this is the same day. So this is the day that he said that he was not exhibiting
Alert.
Signs of psychosis.
And wait, do you notice the jurors responding?
Oh yeah. I mean, it was absurd. It was absurd that he had made that statement or that he had made that diagnosis. It was like this guy was a zombie, literally. He had that million-mile stare. He just wasn't there. He wasn't present mentally. He was whacked out of his mind. So, and I made notes that he was in a catatonic state, that the doctor was speaking to him. Richard Allen was non-responsive. He had just this blank slate look on his face.
And they weren't playing the sound for that.
There was no sound because she had aced the sound.
Not hearsay.
But you can see the nurse talking
right.
to him.
But it's just not here. I mean, it's ridiculous. It makes me so, he's not even talking.
Right. He's not, well, you can see he never moves. He never makes eye contact with the guy that's speaking to him. He can't, at one point his head's like this. It's like, it's crazy. So the next question was that the same Richard Allen that on 6/20 of 23 that you had described as being oriented? And that's what he ends it on. He's like, yes. So Diener gets back up there for redirect. She said, when did your conversation occur outside of the cell? She said, when your conversations would occur outside of the cell, he said he would have to communicate you to know who he was talking to in order to be oriented, right? He's like, was that particular interaction that we just looked at recorded? He's like, I don't remember. I just know that whenever he was moved from his cell to wherever he was going, that was recorded. He's like, she's like, well, was there audio on that? He's like, I would have no idea. And so she said that he was interviewed in his interview cell, meaning the 3x3 cage. He's like, yes, that's where I interviewed him. So this is back to the 20th. We come to find out that he had gotten there early that morning. He said he got to the prison at 6:30 or 7. So he meets with him a couple hours before that video. Okay. So he says at that point, was your meeting with him different from the one that we saw? He's like, yes, it was different. She says, do you have an explanation for it? He says, I don't have an explanation for it. He's like, I watched that and I saw what he looked like, but I don't have an explanation for this video that was different, which we didn't see. We didn't see it. So she says, does the viewing of that video right now make you doubt your observations that you made on June 20th, that they were incorrect? He says, no, they don't. So he said, she says, when you first met Richard Allen, he had existing mental health conditions, correct? And she said, And when you first met him in November, you would consider that to be his baseline condition, correct? That when you saw him on that date, first time in late November, that was his baseline, that was where he would be normally. Said yes. And so at some point after this, after his psychotic treatment, after the Haldol, and you had him on that treatment, is it your opinion that he returned to the baseline, that he returned to that? So she's trying to say that on June 20th, that video that everybody in that courtroom saw,
He was
that was
normal
fake.
hours before. Oh,
Right. That he was normal. Like, so then she says, he says, yes, by May 2nd. So a month preceding that, a month and 18 days, that he was back to his baseline. So she said he was, so in your opinion, he was no longer psychotic on May 2nd of 2023 while still on Haldol. He says, yes, I don't think so. And then so she says, and you proceeded to continue to give him the Haldol because you wanted to make sure that there were no reoccurrences. He says, yes, that's correct. That's why we did that. And then she said, did you ever need to come and see Richard Allen again like you did on April 13th of 2023 when you were called in an emergency situation? And he says, no. So then Rozzi gets to recross real quickly. And he says, okay, so I just want to be clear. So that you said he was spontaneous on 6/20. And then he says, correct? He says, yes. He said, did you see anything in that video that could be even remotely considered to be spontaneous? He says, no. And he says, so Rozzi asks the same question again that Diener asked. He says, does that video make you question your diagnosis or opinion that Richard Allen was not psychotic on 6/20? And he's truthful. He says, yes, it does. So he ends it. We get jury questions, which per usual are all really good. So,
all right. Before you get into jury questions, because I do have to leave.
Okay, that's cool.
I just want to take one of our podcast Patreon's comments, and JD says, "Are you allowed to put video in for closing arguments? I feel like they should put up the video of his interrogation again to remind the jury who he was before all this nightmare began." And I felt that that was an appropriate question to throw in now because, we're seeing like this drastic difference. Now, to answer the question, it all depends. It's at the judge's discretion. Can they ask ahead of time? But they're going to have limited time. So, um, maybe they want to put in some of it, but I think what they'll just do is likely reference it and remind them to watch it, on their own um, during their deliberations. I want to thank everyone for being here, and I'll follow along after I leave. And see you later, babe.
I love you.
Love you too.
All right, I miss you.
Me too.
Okay. All right, so let's get to the jury questions, which were interesting. So the first question was, did the oral Haldol continue to be part of the treatment after 6/20 of 23? So remember, he had said that he had stopped the injections, but it turned out that he did continue to give him oral Haldol after that. So he said, yes, he did. And then, so this was a great question. This was a question that I wanted to know, and I gave you guys the answer already. He says, what time did you meet with Mr. Allen on 6/20 of 2023? And he said, well, I got to the prison early in the morning, like 6:30 or 7 o'clock. I went and had a quick breakfast, and then I went to go meet with them. I can't remember the exact time, but it was sometime within that time frame after I got there and I ate. The next question was, based on behavior you observed, based on the behavior you observed, would you say that anything that he was doing was consistent with feigning? So there's the question. And he says, because nobody asked it, Diener didn't even touch it on cross because she knew what the answer was. He's like, no, I don't think so. None of what I saw was feigning. So which was huge. I think that he really kind of destroyed that whole concept that this was fake, that he was fake. Like that concept is so absurd. People that say that are just so warped. It's like how much do you? Like, I don't know. I don't get that. Uh, so the next question was, did you see anything in that video that demonstrates psychosis? And he said no. That was his answer for that. And then the question, is it possible for RA to slip in and out of psychosis in a 24-hour period? And his answer for that was yes. So that was it. So that was all the witnesses. The state rested officially after the rebuttal, and that led the judge to say, okay, jurors, the case is done. The next time you'll see us will be tomorrow morning. We're going to give you the afternoon off. We have to allow the attorneys to prepare their final arguments for you, and then we will reconvene tomorrow at 9 a.m., which time both the state and the defense will give you their final remarks. And at that point, then you will be given some general instructions. You will be read all of the jury instructions, and you will go back and start deliberating. So then this is where she asks Rozzi if he's got Rozzi and Baldwin if they've got anything. And Rozzi brings up this issue of credibility as to the statements made by RA in terms of his confessions. He says that there's this case, the Stranger case. He says there's a two-part test there. He says he wants to have some language that the defense will be able to highlight or place emphasis on the conditions of his confinement in order to take that into consideration when deciding whether or not those confessions were credible. And then Nick fired back. He said, well, look, I've read this case. He says it's actually that two-pronged test. That second part of the test says that the court first has to determine that those confessions were voluntary and admissible. So at that point, Rozzi said, I'm going to make a motion to withdraw it. I'll withdraw it. Just forget it. And I can understand from that perspective, because he knows how judge would rule on that. She'd say, oh, yeah, I found them to be, those were voluntary. And, and if you're the jury, you can't delineate what the legal definition of voluntary is. And she's not going to go into a long drawn out explanation of what voluntary is to the jury. So voluntary sounds like, oh, yeah, he was just volunteering information and they were all admissible into court. So he withdrew it. She then talks about the pattern instructions, and then ultimately they land on that there's no instruction changes. The ones that she submitted to them first thing in the morning are the ones that they're going to go with. So Baldwin then stands up before she recesses for the day. He says, there were 3 offers of proof I wanted to make. There were 2 inmates that we had subpoenaed. There's this Reese Davis and this other guy, Haas, who were inmates that we wanted to come in. I see at that point, Brad's trying to get Andy's attention. He's like, we never subpoenaed those guys. And Brad or Andy's like, oh, okay, never mind. He's like, oh, so that was 1 and 2. He's like, the third one is that Elvis Fields was properly served to show up here, and he never showed up. And we are asking Your Honor to issue a bench warrant for him. And she's like, why in the world would the trial's over? Like you've put all your the evidence is closed. Like why would I? He's like, well, because I want to put an offer of proof on, and frankly, he's in violation of this court's order. He's in contempt. I think that you should haul him in. And she says, he's like, well, my rule to show cause is that I would have put him on the stand, and I would have asked him a series of questions, and who knows how he would have answered. He could have been like, yeah, like Brad Holder, I saw him recently, or yeah, Brad Holder told me to do this, or, yeah, I still had the knife 6 months later, whatever. Like, who knows what he would have said, but that could have led to an opening of the door where we then could have got in our third party culprit evidence. And she's like, well, again, she goes into the nexus thing. She's like, I understand that you think there's a nexus. I don't think that there's a nexus. You showed me no evidence whatsoever that any of these guys were present during the crime, that they were at the bridge. Like, when she keeps saying that, I'm like, oh my God. I'm like, that is not what third party culprit. That's not what nexus means. You don't have to solve the crime. her expectation. If the crime was solved, those guys would be on trial. That's not what, like, if you had to solve the crime in order to put any kind of, which means that you're able to place the person at the scene of the crime at the time the crime is committed, you've solved the crime, right? So that means that in her world, that you have to solve the crime in order to bring third party culprit defense. Does that sound right to y'all? Because it's not right. That makes no goddamn sense. Like, because those people are called defendants. If you solve the crime and you put somebody at the scene of the crime when the crime was committed, you've solved the crime for the most part. So, like, I don't know. It's like, she's like, I understand that we agree to disagree on that. And, that you'll have to take it up with the appellate court if there's a conviction. It's like, fine, I understand. So, that was basically it. That was the day. And at that point, we all left. It was about just shy of 2:00. And we were able to, really kind of, make moves. Got here, went got some food. Then I'm hanging out with y'all. So let's get into the questions. Let's see what we got. Meg P, congrats on 30K, Bob. And and one thing, I talked to Andrea and Lee. Our plan is that we are excited to do this. We are, during the verdict wait, during the watch, we're all gonna gather at one spot, and we are going to do a round table where all three of us are sitting at a table, hopefully on one camera, if we can figure that part of it out, each with our own mics, and having a discussion, because all of us have been way too busy to watch any of the others live. So, obviously I've been talking to them in there, and we've thrown things back and forth in terms of, like moments in time during the trial, but kind of like in terms of general propositions and what we think and where we think that this might be headed. We don't know. Like, so we think that it'll be great content for y'all. We think that we'll get a lot of questions from you guys answered, and we think that it will be really, really interesting. And we think that it'll be some must TV streaming. So, if that's actually a thing. So, I just want to let you know that. So I'm assuming, I don't know, we'll try to work that for tomorrow, is the plan. And again, we'll stream it to all our individual channels. And we think we have a location set that's close, because we have to be close to the courthouse, because from the moment in time that we learn that there's a verdict, you got to be back there within 10-15 minutes. So we can't be too far. I can't be out here where I'm at, because I'm a half an hour away. And same with Andrea. And I think same with Lee. We're all kind of about different towns, but about a half an hour away. So I'm excited about that. I think it'll be great. I think it'll be really interesting. I'm really anxious to hear what their thoughts are. I know where Andrea's at in terms of like her feelings, because they're very much aligned with me. I think Lee is typically more middle of the road. I know that Lee's typical position is, I'm not gonna say anything about innocence or guilt, which I respect the hell out of, and I'm the same way, until I hear all the evidence, which includes, obviously, closing arguments are not evidence, but you're discussing the evidence and you're arguing about the evidence. So at that point, so I'm interested to hear what Lee's position is. We had a little talk about it. We dipped our toes into it a little bit after court today. So again, Meg, thank you for the $10 hour. Congrats on the 30K. We're very excited. Thank you guys so much. We are so appreciative to all of you that have subscribed to our channel. We love you. We adore you. We're so grateful to all of you. It means everything to us. Cool lady coming through. Always, you are, as I always say, a very cool lady. Thank you for the gifted DD memberships. Amanda, she gifted one out. Thank you so much, Amanda. We appreciate you. Abby Riley, member for 11 months. An OG. I'm nervous that the expert witness that couldn't examine the phone or the bullet will hurt the defense. 100%. I am 100%. I'm with you. Like, even though the kind of the CVs, the resumes of the defense's witnesses were so much more, like, less so with the phone. Like, the phone, like, she had access to the exact same thing that they did. Now, I agree with Allie that had she gotten the phone, she might have been able to dig into areas that maybe Cecil wasn't aware of that you could dig into. I think that her knowledge base was greater. So yeah, in that sense, but I mean, she had the exact same extractions that they were working with. So, but as far as the bullet thing, yeah, I'm concerned about it. I'm concerned about that as well. I think that that could end up hurting the defense. And always appreciate you. $3 holler. Appreciate you so much. Taboo. Public was kept out of this trial. Yes, we have to rely on other people attending to report. So why is every channel report so different? I don't know. I guess the easy answer is perception is everything. It's like I would pretty much stand by every single word that I've said to you guys. Now I may miss stuff because I'm a slow writer, but I'm not getting things wrong. Like everything that I've said has been accurate. And I'm not trying to cast shade on mainstream media, but reporters are not lawyers. Like when you are sitting in a court of law, you are going to get definitively more accurate information. And the significance of what you're hearing is not lost upon lawyers who can describe what something means when it happens. Whereas, unless you've got a real long on the tooth reporter who's been on the crime beat and going to trials for 30 years and who's basically gotten a, ad hoc law school degree because they've been in there so much that they know what things mean. They know, you'll get some pretty good information from that type of reporter. If you got reporters that really don't know anything about the law, how can you expect them to actually report on things in terms of what they mean in conjunction to the case itself? So that's the best answer I have. So I don't know. It's like watch the lawyers. That's my best advice to you. Like I think that we all give pretty accurate information, but I've heard, everybody makes mistakes. We're doing the very best we can in long form handwriting to write down what are very rapid fire cross examinations and direct examinations. It's one of those things where you just cannot write down every word unless you're a machine. And I think Andrea probably gets the closest to doing it. And then I know that uh, there was a woman sitting behind me yesterday, and she had immaculate notes, and she works with Banfield, and I'm like, is there any way I can get your notes? They look amazing. They were like they looked super thorough. Like some people can just write fast as shit and be able to read it. Like that ain't me, but I'm able to get most of it. Like today, I wrote pretty well, and I think I got every single thing that was said. So I was pretty happy with today's performance, my writing performance. But thank you for that question, Taboo. Maced Mama. They were coming to Delphi. Maybe we'll get to meet you. And where's a good place to eat? Send Kathy our support. I will. No FBI. They're shady as shit. I think there's a bunch of places that are great to eat. I love Stonehouse. The sandwich shop is really good. There's a Mexican restaurant. There's a drive-through taco spot that's okay, but the authentic Mexican restaurant that's about like a block and a half from the courthouse is phenomenal. It's excellent and very affordable. So I would recommend all three of those places. I've probably eaten at the Stonehouse most. I went and bought the clerks who were so kind to send Allie and I all the documents in our last 2 years of covering this case. They've made our lives so much easier. Instead of like telling us to pound sand and go on the docket and pull them, the clerks were kind enough to always send us whatever was filed. So I bought them a whole bunch of cookies and snacks and treats from the bakery, and I'm going to drop that off tomorrow because they were closed at noon today. Bankers hours. What happened in August of 21 for Doug Carter to split with the FBI? He didn't say. We don't know. Do we even know what Rick did after he left the bridge area or when Kathy laid eyes on him? Not in evidence. Michelle, that was one of the things that I was talking about earlier. I don't know if you're a little later to the live, but that's one of my concerns. That's going to be a question that is going to weigh very, very heavily on the jurors' minds. And she had answers. I know what the answers are. She was like, well, Rick was asleep on the couch when she got home. It's like, can you do this kind of crime and then go take a nap on your couch? It just seems weird to me. So I asked her flat out. I'm like, was he doing laundry when he got home? Like, does he ever do laundry? Was there laundry in the laundry, like in the washer or the dryer? And she said, no. I'm like, did he leave the house that night at any point? She said, no. So, it's like those decisions for the attorneys and maybe even Rick not wanting to expose his wife to it are very tough decisions strategically. That's like, I worry about that. Like I worry about the bullet. in terms of, because it's like you want the evidence to prove the case. You don't want it to be a situation, well, the defense didn't do this, resulting in the conviction. You want the evidence that the state has put on to be the determining factor, not the things. Because remember, the defense has no burden to do anything. They could have just sat down and not put on any defense and say, okay, that's what you get. That's your evidence. Is that enough to convict them? So, and I'm sure that Rozzi will argue that point adamantly tomorrow. George King, appreciate you. $5 holla. You're awesome. Thank you, George. PM, are you allowed to put video in for the closing arguments? Oh, JD, that's the one that Allie answered. Bob, Allie, do you have an opinion on guilt or innocence? Also, do you have an opinion on which way you think the jury will lean? Like, you're going to have to tune in tomorrow. I'm not going to give any spoilers today. All will be told after closings tomorrow. I think all three of us at that point, Andrea, Lee, and I will all give you our opinions on what we think. And it'll be both. It'll both be what I personally think now that I've heard all the evidence. And I'll also think, I'll give my opinion on which way I think the jury might go on this, because there could be two completely different things, right? They don't have to be the same thing. But I'm going to restate, no matter which way the jury comes down, based on the fact that they were so attentive and that they're clearly smart people, I will always accept the verdict of the jury. Even if I don't agree with it, I will accept it because they sat there and they heard the evidence they were presented. They can't do anything else. We don't want them knowing about the things that we all know following this case for years. We want them coming in and they're just being presented with the evidence. And that's it. They don't know anything about. Now, is there an argument to be made? Obviously, the third party culprit stuff should have been introduced. Of course there is. In my opinion, and it doesn't, you could have skipped all the Odinism shit. You could have just brought in the fact that Elvis Fields said that he spit on one of the girls' heads. That alone, without even talking about the Odinism, Norse paganism stuff, that alone should have been allowed in my opinion. George King then comes in with a DD podcast membership. Thank you, George, for the double up. Appreciate you. Karen, but not a Karen. The headphone port was accessed from 5:44 to 10:23. What time was the trail cam footage for picking someone up? It sounded like it was later than that. It was later than that, but that's good. It might have been like, that's actually a really good question, Karen. I'm going to go check that. I'm going to check that because that's astute. That is an interesting question, because I know there was some like back and forth about whether or not that was on the 13th or whether or not it was on the 14th. I'm going to check that. That's a really interesting thing that you've just said there. Good job, Karen. Lisbeth, New Zealand, $9 holla of New Zealand dough. That worries me. The jurors 4 and 5 at least think the defense needed more. I'm speculating. Don't get me wrong. Like I've said, I have been with my wife for 20 plus years, and I never know what she's thinking, and I know her better than anybody else I know on the planet. So it would be completely ridiculous for me to be sitting here pretending like I know what are going through the minds of the jurors. She could have been putting her eyebrows up like, oh, they said it was going to be a month. It's only been 3 weeks. Who knows? You know what I'm saying? It's like, I'm speculating completely on what they're thinking. I have no clue. I am not a mind reader at all. So you take what I'm saying with a grain of salt in terms of whatever I'm speculating that a juror might think. But it's what I was thinking. And then when I was thinking it, I looked over. So of course I'm imputing my own thoughts into what they're thinking, which is, of course, could be completely different things. So, but thank you for that. I appreciate the generosity. Penar, did they hash out the jury instructions today already? Yep, that is done. Pepper pot. Love that. You know how much I love saying pepper pot, don't you? Question, did something unexpected happen this morning? The defense resting without putting any witnesses on took me a little bit by surprise. I'm not going to lie. Thank you for the question. Freckled Gemini. Good to see you, Freckled. Does Fran not have a duty to assure that they have what they need? Serious question. Or is that solely the attorneys? So who, if you're still here, Freckled, flesh that thing out. Does Fran not have a duty to them? Who's them? The jurors? Serious question. Or is that solely on the attorneys? Let me know what you mean, because I don't know what you mean. I don't want to answer it incorrectly. Taboo. Wow, that's a short session for jury instructions. It was insanely short. Typically, we're always supplying both sides. Typically, supply the judge with their proposed instructions, and then you have an actual conference. So yes, it was. That was surprising. That was definitely surprising. Was there any argument from either side to have the jury visit the site? So the defense had filed a motion for a site visit, and then they withdrew it. So before the trial, right before the trial started. So I was actually the mindset that after the van thing came up, that they should have renewed it, knowing that Gold would deny it, but then you just have it on the record, and it's something that the appellate court could have weighed in on if he's convicted. So that was my mindset, because that van thing really bugged me, and I was like, God damn it! It's like I just want to know if you can even see that access rule. Like, how much of it can you see? Is it even a feasible story? You know, because like the thing he says, I did something with the gun. Like, what do you mean you did something? Like, wouldn't you know what you did with the gun? I racked the gun, and the the casing popped out, and I didn't know where it went. It's like I did something with the gun. So just seeing this on X, Andrew Baldwin asked in court. Yes, true story. Talked about that. Why isn't it a Brady violation? I'm sorry. Something is so funny. That one should have been answered timely, because I don't know what you're referencing within the last 2 hours and 40 minutes. Travis, my man, what is happening? If she denies giving the charge, I think it is going to be very difficult for the jury to know what to do with the confessions. They will have no frame of reference. They will have no idea that they can give it zero weight. I agree. But I also get why Rozzi backed away from it, considering that second prong would have had to come in, which I think may have confused them even more with respect to, that the judge, it had to have been deemed voluntary and admissible from the judge in order to get that instruction. So, crypto. I can't piece together where things went awry, but I'm feeling dejected, and this abrupt arrest was anticlimactic. Is it just me? No, you know, it, coming in today, I mean, you can always look at, thank you, either Mandy or Missy. And thank you, Crypto, for the $10 holla. I thought they were going to put on a couple more witnesses. I thought at the very least that they were going to put on Stacey Eldridge again, their forensic data person. And I was a little bit shocked that they didn't, but maybe at the end, she was there. She was in the hallway. I seen her. I told her she did a nice job yesterday on the stand. She said, thank you. And then I thought that there was a very high likelihood that Kathy would be put on the stand today. I thought that she was critical, potentially, like it's like where I'm kind of at, and I'm doing a little foreshadowing till tomorrow, is that we have a jury that has been presented with a series of facts that they know that Richard Allen was out at that bridge. There's a little bit of a question as to when, whether it was 12 to 1:30, whether it be 1:30 to 3. And the big gaping hole is that they don't know what happened to him after that. They don't know what time he got home. They don't know if he left home at any point that night. They don't know anything about anything. There was no phone data. That wasn't really addressed, why it didn't exist. The state just makes this bald assertion that, we couldn't find his phone. It's like I would have liked to have seen, if possible. Like, I don't know what the evidence is, so it's like easy for me to sit on the sidelines in terms of what they had in actual discovery to kind of put in there to say, okay, well, Ting doesn't keep that kind of data. Ting is not that company. Ting ain't Verizon and AT&T. There's some kind of fly by night little phone company that you get cheap ass service through, and that you're not going to get records. They're going to be able to say, okay, well, Rick Allen, everything that he had went to the cloud. I don't know if Ting has a cloud. I don't know if they rent cloud space from somebody that does have cloud. Yeah, I don't know any of that stuff, so because you don't need somebody's phone in this day and age to get the historic, precise data information, location information. You don't need it. You don't need the device, because it's all kept on in the mainframes. servers that they keep the information. So, like, but those are like, we can't pretend that those are not going to be pressing questions for the jurors. Like, what, like, we know he was out there. Well, what did he do afterwards? Even though there's no burden on the defense at all, there's still going to be questions that could have been answered in their minds potentially by Kathy Allen. So that's what you have to worry about. So, and I am certain that the defense wrestled with that decision like we do with any witness that we're ever going to put on. Do we put them on? Do we not put them on? If we do, how are we going to approach it? Like what are the potential pratfalls? What are the potential landmines that exist by putting this witness on? And I mean, ultimately they made a decision not to put Kathy on. I mean, could it be a mistake? Maybe. Definitely could be. I mean, there's gaping holes in the story from the defense side of it. So, I mean, even especially in light of that, you've got the situation wherein we now know that there's a distinct possibility that a human being plugged in either headphones or an aux cord into that phone at 5:44 p.m. and then unplugged it at 10:23. And I had a very interesting DM in my Insta last night. The person said, well, the reason, like all that shit that Nick was talking about moving the phone and with the Apple Health data have picked it up, they're like, they left the phone. The person, the killers, they plugged either headphones or an aux cord in it to kill the sound of it because they wanted to keep the phone on. And then they put the shoe on top of it. And then they took the girls, and the phone remained there until they brought the girls back. And then they put the girls, Abby on top of the shoe and the phone, and Libby where she was. It was an interesting concept. I was like, that's interesting. Shiloh. After all this, what does everyone really think about the bridge guy video? Nothing burger? I don't think it's a nothing burger. I think that, the thing that's interesting about this, and I'm going to restate it. I know I told you guys very early on in our coverage, was that they only get to view videos that they want to review one time. Like in my world, I'm like, why is she limiting the jury's ability to watch something as many times as they want when we're trying to decide someone's innocence or guilt? Like, what is that all about? If they want to watch the bridge guy video 1,000 times, you know what? Let them. I don't understand that rationale. I just don't. And that goes for anything that they want to view. It's a one-time deal. One and done, which I think is absurd, personally. Elvis Fields, am I hearing right? Baldwin? Yes, he did, Pepper. Yes, he did. It was denied. She did not issue it. Brittany, I'm really interested in knowing why they didn't put Kathy on the stand. I feel like she could have been a good character witness. Agreed. I mean, there's things like there's the things that I could think of offhand were the interview where she is brought in when they're making the run, the second run. Holman's making the run at Rick Allen. Doing the read technique. They had gone and they told Kathy that we got your husband dead to rights. We found a round from his gun 6 inches away from the girl's foot, from Abby's foot. So she goes into that room convinced that they got him. So that's where her mind's at. And then she makes that statement in there. She's like, were you out at the bridge? I don't remember you telling me you're out to the bridge. That's potentially something the defense could be worried about coming up. Now, I think there's a more than reasonable explanation for that. One, the cops have planted the seed that her husband did this by saying that they have evidence against him, which they didn't at that point. I mean, I guess you could argue it either way, but so she going in there with that mental state, and it was 5 years prior. I mean, if she's going in there, oh my God, they caught him. Like, she's going to be tending to think that you didn't tell me you were at the bridge exactly. You just said you went out to the trail. So that could be it. What happened to Rick's phone? Like there was evidence that came out that said you were the one who might have recycled it in those same interviews. Because they asked him, where's the phone? He's like, I don't know. Kathy handles all the phones. That's an area where they could have been worried about her giving an answer that, and you worry in cases like this where the community is so toxic that you worry about Kathy's safety. You worry about people coming after Kathy if she says something on the stand that somebody decides to misconstrue, which, if you know anything about human beings, we misconstrue shit all the time. So, I mean, there's a lot of reasons. I mean, what you have to do is you have to weigh it. Do those risks outweigh her being able to say that Rick was asleep on the couch when I got home at 4:30? Does it outweigh the fact that there was no laundry being done when she got home? Does it outweigh the fact that she could have testified that he'd never left the house till the next day to go to work? Like those things, like the dough. I don't know. It's tough. Do it. Love you, man. Congrats on 30K, Allie and Bob. Thank you, Chris. You're awesome, man. Appreciate you, dude. Robin, I kept hoping defense would make a bigger deal about the 2 stories up, steps on the phone. What say you? I agree. I do. But remember, I mean, that's probably going to come up in argument during the closing arguments. Like that's really where both sides are tying tying all the bows together on these narratives they have. They're going to really try to tighten it up. They're going to point out the flaws. They're going to say, this is why you have reasonable doubt here. You can't convict. You've got somebody, they came up with something off of Google. That's all the evidence. They Googled something about, water damage, which they never checked for on the phone, or dirt getting in there, which how would dirt come out magically? Like once the dirt's in, like dismiss the dirt thing altogether. Cause like the dirt's not going to fall out at 1023 magically, right? Or whatever would be in there. So it's the water damage question is like, does the water damage work in terms of, okay, so it gets water damage at some point, we have the problem of trying to suspend disbelief and say, okay, well, in your narrative, they're coming across the creek at 2:28, 2:29, which theoretically, if that's when the phone would get wet, yet the phone doesn't go into headphone mode for 2.5 hours after that. And then you're assuming that it dries out in 27-degree weather. I mean, so I don't know. DSN, $5 holla. Appreciate you. Always, DSN. Jake, $2 holla. Thoughts on zero alibi evidence for RA? Well, I discussed it. Thank you for the $2. Could be a problem. Could be a real problem. Again, despite the fact that defense doesn't have to put shit out there, aside from that fact, like that's the reality. But the other reality is that Kathy was there every day at trial. The jury saw and knows who Kathy is. They watched a video of her coming in. They watched her being emotional. They know that she was available to testify and she didn't come up. I mean, that's a reality. And who would be best situated to talk about where Rick was after that day? Kathy. I mean, it's a problem. It's a problem. So there's no question about it. Mama T, does the jury get the list of witnesses? Thank you for your coverage of this trial. My husband and I laugh at your banter towards each other. I love that. Thank you. I imagine that you have a lovely marriage as well. Allie and I are both lawyers. We're both strong-willed, and we give and get and give. That's how we roll. That's how our whole family is. It's how all of us are. We're just we go with our 18-year-old. She can give it and get it just as good as Allie and I. Same with Scout, frankly. Okay, let me see. Like, I feel like Steve, PB, publicly buzz Steve here trying to, no cure USA. All right, I did it. Thank you so much for becoming a new family member. Oh, family hug. Welcome. Purple. Without phone geodata and without him or his wife taking the stand, how can he provide an alibi? I mean, he doesn't have to provide an alibi. You know what I'm saying? I mean, like what his alibi is, at least in the time that matters in this case, is that he was there at 12 to 1:30 and that he was gone. They haven't really proven, like they're saying that he's bridge guy, except none of the witnesses pointed him out and said that's bridge guy. So you're left with this thing where if anybody on the jury says, okay, well, Richard Allen, I believe that he was there from 12 to 1:30. They didn't really prove that was his car. You can't see it definitively. There were many other cars out there that, and like, they didn't even get into other makes that look like that car, you know. But it's like it's easy to sit back after a trial and nitpick about things. It's like, would I have liked to have seen a video? But the question becomes, how do you get the video in of where Rick describes himself parking in that interview? I suppose that you could have tried to get it in through, I forget who that was, if that was Holman, or I think it was Holman. It was during the Holman interview. You could have said, all right, well, this is the place he's describing, because I was there. I had Kathy bring me to the spot where they always parked, which was exactly where he was describing, which was on the opposite side of the Freedom Bridge. So the opposite side of the Hoosier Heartland. Okay. And there's a little red bridge. So you got the Freedom Bridge, you got the little red bridge that goes over 25. And just beyond that to the left, there's a little gravel area that, if you go beyond that, there's a dirt road or a gravel road that goes down that leads right into a paved road that goes right into town. Like, I could walk to town. I walked all the way down. Like, that's exactly where he parked. It's not the old CPS building. There's no building near it. It's like, that's not where he described it. They put him in a place that he didn't park. So whatever car that Betsy Blair saw at the old CPS, number one, wasn't Richard Allen's. And number two, that's not where he parked anyway. So that car is the real mystery of this case, because I don't know what car Heath saw, the old timer, the exterminator guy who saw the mysterious looking car that didn't belong there at 8:30, and, or like, he saw it, I think he said at 8:30, and it was still there at 2:30. Unfortunately, because I couldn't see the damn evidence, I don't know if the sketch that he drew, because he's the guy who said, I watched the old, it wasn't the movie. I'm very clear on this, because I was watching the old Fugitive show, the TV show, and I saw the car came on, and I was like, oh man, that looks just like the car I saw. It's just like it. Tells his wife, that's the goddamn car I saw. So, that's when he calls and says, look, I think I saw the car. And he kind of tries to draw it out. I wouldn't be surprised if it looks a lot like, because he says, I thought it was an old car. I don't know cars, though. I have to admit, I don't know anything about cars. They're not my thing. He's like, but, I'm guessing it's from the 80s or 90s. I did a IMDb search. I mean, the Fugitive show, and there's only the TV show, and there's only the movie. I haven't found any other. There haven't been multiple Fugitive TV shows. There were certainly none of them in the 80s or the 90s. The thing ran from 63 to 67. Logic dictates that the car that he saw had to have been from 63 or 67. I then went into the car database, the internet car database that shows every car from every TV show and every movie that's ever been in any scene. And they list it, and I went through it. And they had a whole bunch of Mercuries. They didn't have a Comet, but they had a bunch of cars that were Mercuries that looked just like the Comet or very similar. This case, man, this case. Eleanor, $2 holler. Please let Kathy know a corner England here with her. I will. I tell her, she knows that she has a lot of. I mean, Kathy's not at all been accused of killing anybody, and Kathy's life was destroyed. So I mean, no matter what happens with Rick, either way, you have to feel sympathy for Kathy if you're a human being. Otherwise, I got no time for you if you don't feel that way. Like, honestly, we got nothing to talk about if you're that person. You ain't my people if that's how you're like. It's Debbie Richards, $10 holla. It's stunning how many fellow Hoosiers don't know anything about this case. It's not that stunning, considering it's been tried in the dark. Nobody is hearing the truth about this case. I guess that's just how Gull wanted it. Agreed, Debbie. Sure is suspect. Thank you so much for that $10 holiday, W, by the way. Andy, to clarify, I know that psychiatrists are doctors. I'm asking, not well, if he is specialized in psychiatry or an internist or DO. I got he's strictly a psychiatrist. His license or trail it's specious. He went to medical school in St. John's, not St. John's that you'd be thinking of, but St. John's somewhere in India. So start there. Start there. Bob, do you think the unexpected rebuttal was why the state only called 3 witnesses? Nah, I think that's what it was. Remember, with respect to a rebuttal, this is not an opportunity for the state to say, "Oh shit, well we forgot to put this in our state's case in chief, so we're gonna try to wedge it in here." No, your rebuttal has to be in direct rebuttal to evidence that was presented by the defense in their case in chief. That's it. It's limited to that. If you try to bring something else in, you're going to get the objections beyond the scope of the defense's case in chief, and it's not admissible. So this looks like it was to Matty Joe. Do you know if he was licensed in Indiana? He says that he was, yes. Also in Illinois. He said Florida, Illinois, Indiana is where he's licensed. Miss Smith, I'm guessing Max would have heard if the guard threatened him or coerced him. It's crazy the state wouldn't allow the audio. I mean, just in general, yeah. Like on the camcorder, yeah, but they're not idiots. They know it had audio and they lied about it. Like initially in the first hearing back in June, they lied. They said that it didn't have audio. I'm like, I went to Allison after that thing. I'm like, is it possible like that a camcorder doesn't have audio? And I'm like, and if so, can you turn it off? And it turns out that they were lying about it, that it does. I don't know. Crypto, I'm gonna go broke because I love chatting with the modders. But oh well, we love you, Crypto, and you're just overall generally very generous. I know that you give love to all our other creators too, and we love people like you because you really sustain us. It's folks like you that just make the day. So I appreciate you so much. Good showing by M. Weinberg for Karen Reed today in front of the MA Supreme Court. AJ had a baby beard now. Oh, I like it. Another beardsman. I always love beardsmen. Thank you so much for your generosity, your constant generosity throughout this entire trial, Crypto. We really appreciate you. And that was good work you did for your friend, by the way. I know I told you, but wanted to restate it. It's a proud moment. It's good. It was fighting the good fight. I love it. Criminal network. How could DNA be such a huge factor in the case? And now all of a sudden it means nothing. I mean, they didn't really have any. It's like they had a bunch of a bunch of unknown samples. They never really try to figure out who they are. I mean, it's like it becomes a huge thing for the defense to point out, look at all the shit that these people didn't do. Miss Smith, why was he so afraid to leave his cell originally? Did the guards keep telling him to confess? I mean, Miss Smith, I guess let me ask you this question. If you were, I mean, is a general proposition, if you're a human being on this planet and specifically in this country, I think that it's safe to say that we all know that suspected pedos, child, people that befall any kind of harm to children, especially children killers, child killers, are, in terms of the honor among thieves, they are short-lived in prisons. Right. I think it's safe to say that we all know that is a fact. That's not just some kind of story that's told. They put them in, they tuck them away. A lot of times they'll tuck them all in their own wing. They'll keep them away from everybody else because they know that the other inmates want to kill them, like literally. So, I mean, that's why, like, he would be thinking, that you've got people that are screaming that he's a baby killer. I mean, so like he didn't really have to think too hard about like, oh my God, do these people want to kill me? So he said, did the guards keep telling him to confess? I mean, who knows? Like, I think with the more common, to me, the more common sense thing that would have gone down is that secondary gain that they were trying to say that Richard Allen was trying to use by faking his psychosis, which is absurd, but that it was the guards that were offering a secondary gain. And that they were saying, look, Okay, look, do you want this shit to be over, dude? Like, do you want to get out of this hellhole? We'll get this transfer done. You just got to tell us you did it. You just got to tell us you did it. It's that simple. Like, you want to see your wife for the first time in 7 months? Just tell us you did it, dude. I mean, it would have been something like that, I think. Angel, has any rights organizations filed against prison treatment of an unconvicted person? I don't know, but I know that Rozzi, during the trial back in June, um, he filed something to preserve Richard Allen's right to sue. So I know that that's out there. PM Bob is really good at noticing phony language, like the one man cell and laying in wait. I mean, that's like, right? Fucking like Rick Allen's not saying laying in wait. Some like cop shit, or some like like somebody writing a thriller novel or some mystery novel. There was the killer laying in wait. It's just not what a normal person would say. Big love to the boots on the ground crew. Appreciate you, Tracy, so much. Legends. It's been a thing. Lauren, Bob, and Allie have been fighting for people on Twitter. Oh, thanks. You don't need to. I don't give a fuck. Like, seriously. They have balls, they can come right to me. I back away from no one. I don't give a shit. Like anybody who talks shit is clearly afraid to discuss things with me, because I've never turned anybody down talking ever. Not one person. Like I went on a Gray Hughes thing. It took him like a half an hour, like 45 minutes to figure out how to get me on. And I went on there. It's perfectly civil conversation. I mean, we clearly disagree on the case and the strength of the evidence, which is fine. Like, I don't care. Like, I argue for a living. People still tend to forget that. I think that there may be this thing because I have a tendency to not be like erudite in my speech. And I try to keep my language more like the every person, as opposed to coming off like a stuffed shirt lawyer, which I could do. I mean, if you guys want me to start doing that, I'll do it. But I think the relatability is kind of one of my strong suits. And I think that people forget that I practiced law for 23 years, that I actually know what the hell I'm talking about. Like when Allie and I, like, our thing is, I keep it to the everyman, and I want Allie to do all the explaining, and then I decipher what she's saying to y'all so that you guys can understand it. Like, that's our thing. That's how we decided to work this thing, So it's like I have no idea. But thank you, Lauren. Like, it's the thought that counts. So I don't want to in any way make it not abundantly clear that I appreciate you having our back, because I do. Sandy, golf cart lady, $5 hello. When you are on Haldol, you are susceptible to suggestive comments. Like, do you know you killed those girls because of a white van? For sure. Like anything's in play, anything's in play. That being said, the confessions, like I told you before trial, are a problem. You know what else is a problem? Like I said before trial, whether it's junk science or not, the fact is that the unspent casing got in the eyes of a jury. It's going to be a powerful piece of evidence, because they're going to have a cop up there or somebody that works for the cop saying that the thing's a match. Whether or not it's like how much weight they give it, I don't know, but I can tell you definitively it's a problem. I told you guys that going in. That is evidence that scares you as a defense attorney. You are trying to figure out, Brad Rozzi was trying to figure out going into this trial, all of the ways to try to attack it. And I think, and let me just say this, I thought that both teams, the state, in terms of what Nick had presented to him, the evidence that he had, I thought that they put on a very good case. He's limited to the evidence that they have. He can't create any evidence that they don't have. So in terms of what he was left with, I thought that he put on a very solid case. In terms of my estimation of an evaluation of his trial skills, I think he's a very good lawyer. I think he did a very good job on the trial. I really do. And I thought that Andy and Brad were excellent as well. I thought this was a very professionally done trial. For all the people out there calling Brad and Andy clowns, you can go fuck yourselves. You don't know anything about the law. Those are two skilled litigators in there that put on a hell of a defense, despite the fact that they were completely kneecapped. And as far as Nick goes, all the people that are like, oh, Mata's a shill for the defense. Bullshit. I'm a shill for Kathy Allen and her rights. I'm an advocate for her. That's who I'm a shill for. And I'm a shill for due process. And I'm a shill for the Constitution. You don't know jack shit about me. And you don't know anything about our content if you say anything otherwise. So for all the haters out there, love ya. Jason, thanks to both Bob and Allie for what you must have been painful work. Do you think Judge Gold should be disciplined for the case and how she ran it? She's not going to be. The discipline will come if she gets overturned and the thing goes back if he's convicted. That's, I think she should be. Yeah. Yeah. And I have a pretty strong feeling Andrea's going to try to get in that ass. Like she's an appellate lawyer. She loves that kind of shit, man. And I'm all about it. Whatever she needs from me, because I know she's going to be digging into Gaul. It's like I've been watching Gaul for 2 years. I kept telling Andrew, I'm like, man, see, I'm like, I wasn't out here talking shit. It's like people it's why I loved that I had other lawyers in there that weren't involved in the case that were finally watching the case. It's like I have Osbrook and I have Kara, and it's like, but now I have people that aren't Indiana lawyers that are coming in to watch the trial and they're like, wow, Gaul. I told you. It's not just me. Crypto, coming back hard. I think you were broke. You're amazing. Drinking game for B Money, AB, and LL Roundtable. Oh, what happened? Oh, got scared. Let's see. Roundtable, start thinking of your words. Wait, what? I got a CLE tomorrow, Bob. What? Are you crazy? Isn't that some shit you can just watch a different time? Dang. Well, fortunately, we got a replay crew. You know what I mean? Thank you so much for your generosity. Your continuing generosity, Crypto. Appreciate it. Janet stuttered. Love you guys. Love you back, Janet. Member of 12 months. OG, original gangster. I mean, we're only a year old, our little channel here. And like to break 30K, we're super grateful to you guys. It's amazing. We love you guys so much. We really do. We've been building this community that we just adore. We adore it. We adore it. I miss my brother Jay. Dude had to go out into the freaking world and go back to the rat race, and I miss him out here. But we built this community together, and my brother's publicly buzzed. Joey Jack alone, it's like hopefully he'll get back here someday. But we have this great community, and we couldn't adore you guys anymore. Josh Ritter, my homie, Courtroom Confidential, love him. It's just a great guy. Joel at STS. It's like, there's just so many great. Andrea, G, and the Grizzlies. There's so many people that I adore out there. And it's like I like to give love to other creators. I'm never one to be like, don't watch their shows. It's like, nah. There's enough space for all of us. It's like, well, I'll give you something a little bit different. So, Jason, also an intellectual property lawyer and a criminal lawyer. You ain't never lied, brother. Thank you so much. That is gospel, son. Jipton, $2 holla. Appreciate you. Love those scales of justice there on your little profile pic. It's cool. Mace Mama, $1.99, $2 holla. I meant not having the FBI shitty shit. Fuck yeah, it's crazy. It's crazy shady. There's no excuse for kicking out the feds unless you're trying to hide something. I don't know. Unless it's the ego thing. That's the only other thing I can think of. And cops do have egos. They like to be the ones to crack the case. Like, there's no question about that. It is factual. Cops, like I say it all the time, agencies do not play well with one another. It's just facts. They don't do it. They don't like it. They don't like people coming into their turf. They don't like people coming into their jurisdiction. They don't like people coming in and solving their shit because they're like, we could have done that. Like, who do you think you are? That kind of mentality. So, I mean, it could be that. Lindsay Bay, $5. We depend on you and Allie. You got us to the finish line. Thanks, Bob. You're a hero. Oh, thanks, Lindsay. Appreciate you so much. Laura Smart feels unfair. Not all the evidence given. I do not disagree. Hoosier Girl, do you know why they never brought Kagan? They couldn't get him in. Couldn't put him on the stand. That's why. Couldn't do it. She would not allow it. Gull would not allow it. Hoosier Girl, come back with $10 holla. Appreciate you, Hoosier Girl. Always. Jessica, $20 holla. 30 minutes north of Delphi was my solitary time. Oh, man. So perspective here for corruption. My crime was a Class A misdemeanor. Oh, my God. I was pregnant and gave birth there. My ex-husband's uncle was the sheriff and runs deep here. Oh, my God. What's defense strat? Man, I'm so sorry you went through that shit. Jeez. It's so scary. Like, just little stories like this, just let that soak in. Like, Jessica's not coming. She's not coming in here with some bullshit. She's telling you gospel here. If you don't think it could be you, think again. Thanks for sharing, and thanks for the generosity, Jessica. Crime Time Crochet, $5. I've only recently heard the motorcycle club theory. Have you gone down this rabbit hole? If so, thoughts? I have heard this theory, and I think it has legs. Jennifer, that's for a different live, though. We'll do that kind of stuff after the fact, like when I'm trying to, like figure out things. Jennifer Hoff, $5 holla. Discussion with Michelle After Dark explained phone movements and with the state's theory, many meters unaccounted for. Defense never mentioned it. Thoughts? I don't know. I mean, I think that they did the best that they could with the details that they had. It's like if they're, because they're going to rely on an expert to come at them, and their expert got on the stand and said that she was pretty much in agreement with Cecil's, the number of steps taken and when the phone stopped moving and time frame. So it's like, if your expert's saying that, what are you going to do? It's like we rely on our experts to give us the straight dope. So I don't know. Thank you for that, though, Jennifer. Appreciate it. $5 holla from Buffy. Thank you. Stephen Lennon, New Zealand, $2 holla. Why didn't they bring up the van again? It's a good question. I bet we'll hear about it in closing, though. Jessica back, restorative justice and mental health specialist, a few jails and helped formal reentry committees. Treatment awareness is crucial. Thank you so much. Thank you for going out there and realizing that you can actually, as somebody who went through it, that you can provide something very, very meaningful and helpful to those that are experiencing the same things that you did. That's huge heartedness, and that's turning lemons into lemonade, and that's using your misfortune to try to help others. So I applaud you massively, Jessica. And again, thank you for sharing not just your money, but more importantly, your story. So thank you. Kathy, always love you. Appreciate your support. $5 holla. You're amazing. Steve Musselman, what happens if the jury is hung in Indiana? Retrial. Goes back to trial. That's what it means. Buffy, $5. Can you remind me if RA ever said white van? He did not. Just said van. I hope Abby and Libby's families know that we want justice for them. They do. Like, everybody's in this for the same thing. Like the fact that everyone wants justice for Abby and Libby is not mutually exclusive from demanding that people in this country get a fair trial. So, it's not a one or the other proposition. And some people just have cognitive dissonance in trying to understand that concept. And it's not that difficult. We can all do want justice for Abby and Libby. At the same time, you want to have faith in the conviction. You want to feel that they got the right guy. And when they do the process like this, it leaves way too many questions about whether or not they got the right guy. That's the bigger point of what I've been trying to say for 2 years. That's the takeaway from Bob and Allie's channel about the Delphi case. It's that simple. Thank you for that. Buffy, appreciate it. Glenda, they could check the board on the board vehicle diagnostic ports and scan both Valen's cars, take the cars before they could have. Just another thing that they didn't do. Glenda, thank you for the $5 holla. It's a lot of stuff they could have done. Many, many things that they could have done in 7 years. Jordan Lanigan, the dedication you and your wife have to get the truth out to the public about this trial is so appreciated. Thank you so much. We appreciate you. Thank you for all that you guys do. Thank you for supporting us. We really appreciate it. Beautiful Messy Ball member for 3 months. Appreciate you, Messy. How do Libby and Abby families seem to be holding up? They seem to be holding up well, considering. They, like I said, Becky Patty showed what a woman of high character that she is yesterday when, she was trying to help Kathy Allen get her seat situation taken care of. And, I had no doubt that she was a wonderful woman. And, she just proved it once again right there. A pillar of strength is how I would describe Becky Patty. Sarah Brown, thank you again for taking the time from your lives to give us a pair of eyes on the inside to allow us to understand the mess of this whole thing. We appreciate you. And I appreciate you, Sarah. And thank you for those kind words. They mean a lot to me. Daniel Corbia, $10 holla. Every night I've been here and listening to your recordings to piece this case together. And I just don't think the state proved RA did anything but be at the trails. If I was a juror, not guilty. We'll see if those jurors in there agree. I mean, I think you're hearing all of it. I certainly haven't been changing what was said in order to tilt it towards the defense. It's like I'm giving it to you straight. I mean, if today isn't straight enough where I'm talking about the holes in the defense and the potential problems, like do I always look at things through I'm a defense lawyer, so God, yes. It's like I can't untrain my brain from the way it works, but I'm always going to be objective. Defense attorneys have to be objective. Prosecutors, subjective, narrow, tunnel vision. Oh, that's the guy, to the exclusion of everybody else. That's how they operate. Defense attorneys, we have to try to think of everything possible under the sun in order to try to provide a defense sometimes. So by our very nature, we are objective. So, like my reporting on this has not been biased at all. Like I'm flat. I mean, the name of our channel is Defense Diaries. Our podcast is named Defense Diaries. There is no doubt that we are defense attorneys. However, in terms of reporting strictly on what is going on in that courtroom, you separate me relaying the facts of what I heard and wrote down. And then when I'm talking about my opinion, that's something different, right? Those are two separate things. I'm not infusing my opinion into facts that I'm hearing at trial. That's not happening. And I think that people that watch this understand that that's the case. Did they figure out Bridge Guy's height? Nope. Just another thing they did not do. Neither side did it. Kraken. We lift each other up. 100% ethical contract. Content creators unite. Love it. Absolutely. 100% on that. Thank you so much for being a member. We adore you, Kraken. You're amazing. All right. So that was the day. I am joining Vincenzo once again tonight. And we will, at that point, I'll be done. But we're going on at 8 tonight. So Vinny's putting it up an hour. We're not on Vinny Politan Investigates. We're on regular, whatever the show is before that, like just the regular news. So you guys are amazing. Go enjoy Andrea if you're going to go hang out over there. Like I said, we're excited. We're going to do a 3-person panel with Lee, Andrea, and myself, all kind of round tabling it, just discussing what we think about this case, where we think it's at, what we think we would like to have seen either the state do or the defense do, what we think the jury might do, what we think might happen with the end game, like all of it. We're going to talk about all of it. It's going to be awesome. We will give you the deets once we get it set up, but we're looking forward to it. Again, tomorrow morning, bright and early, 9 a.m., closing arguments, and then we're on verdict watch. So you guys rock. I love you all. Oh, wait, let me check, make sure. We got, there's a couple of, I got a couple of late Venmos that I want to talk about. Hannah L paid us $5 yesterday. Thank you for all you do, Allie, and your fair perspective. Allie appreciates that, I assure you. Ann P, always give her $30, closing in on 30K subs. Thank you so much for that generous love. Lindsay C paid $50. Defense Diaries, Delphi, you and Allie are amazing. Thank you so much, Lindsay. Thank you for all your hard work and for the humanity you bring to this. We try. I mean, I try to be a decent human being. I really do. And I think that I am one, but you know, Megan P, always give her, appreciate you. Paid us $30. Meg P, for your mental health after this trial. Appreciate you so much, Meg. So mods, I love you. I adore you. Thank you so much for all your hard work this entire trial. We're getting close to the end, kids. We're getting close to the end. So you guys have been on double, triple duty, and you guys are amazing. I adore every single one of you. I thank you from the bottom of my heart, truly, and to everybody who has helped build us this community to 30K. We're excited. We're hoping to bring it to the moon, and we hope that we give you content that you want to keep coming back for. So we love you guys. Thank you so much, because remember, without y'all, I'm just an old man talking about a bunch of cases. Talking to you tomorrow.